Welcome. You've come to a quiet place. A place where ancient stories drift like candle smoke, where the voices of long-forgotten women echo gently through time. Tonight, we'll travel far back to the dusty shores of the Sea of Galilee, to a quiet fishing village where baskets are woven by hand, where sandals press into sun-warmed stones, and where one woman's name has traveled the centuries, misunderstood and misremembered. Her name was Mary. Not Mary, the mother of Jesus, but Mary of Magdala, a follower, a mystic, a witness to resurrection. You've likely heard pieces of her story, some familiar, others whispered or misread. Tonight, we'll walk beside her, not in haste, but slowly, gently, not for answers, but to witness. We'll begin with her world daily rhythms and rituals. Then we'll hear her story, the moments that marked her life. After that, we'll pause for wonder, exploring ancient scrolls and mysteries, stories once hidden in shadows. And finally, we'll lift the veil and compare her life to those who ruled from above, quiet faith versus power cloaked in robes. Let yourself settle, let your breath deepen, and let the night guide you as we begin with life in Magdala. Break time equals 2 south greater than segment 1. Daily life in Magdala. Imagine yourself walking just before sunrise. The air is cool, kissed by the nearby waters of Galilee. Faint light begins to spill over the hills as fishermen pull nets from the shallows. Their boats creak softly as they glide through the silver mist. You are in Magdala, a small town with a big name, Migdal-Nanaya, Tower of the Fish. Here, life is shaped by water. The sea feeds the people, washes the laundry, baptizes the young. Mary would have known this rhythm well. Her morning likely began before the sun. She would have risen to the sounds of chickens rustling, the muffled grinding of grain in nearby homes, and the creak of buckets pulled from a communal well. The stone homes were close, sometimes clustered around shared courtyards. Floors were swept clean with bundles of dried branches. Her tunic, likely woven from undyed wool, would have felt scratchy at first touch, softening as it warmed to her skin. Women in her village worked in quiet collaboration. They kneaded bread together, boiled lentils and herbs in clay pots, dyed linen with madder root and saffron, and sang lullabies passed down for generations. Some worked in trade. Magdala was a thriving town, not a backwater, but a place of movement. Boats came from Tiberias and beyond. Spices, fish, linen, and rumors all flowed freely here. The smell of salted fish was constant, sharp but clean. Vendors wrapped bundles in woven reeds, while children chased each other between market stalls. Mary may have grown up with siblings, or perhaps she was an only child, her parents shaping her worldview with quiet intensity. Either way, the life of a Jewish woman in the Galilee was one of repetition and ritual. Each week turned like a wheel. There were preparations for Shabbat, sweeping, baking, washing. There were visits to the mikveh, the ritual bath, a place of purification, quiet, and renewal. The synagogue in Magdala was unusual, one of the oldest known in Galilee. Its floors were paved with mosaics, and its walls held echoes of ancient prayers. Men would sit on stone benches to study the Torah, but women? They listened from behind lattice or doorways, present, but unseen. Mary would have memorized prayers from a young age, the Shema, the Psalms, the words of the prophets. She likely knew the sound of Isaiah's scroll being unrolled, the crackling of parchment, and the rhythm of a rabbi's voice echoing in the stone chamber. And still, even among this rhythm, there were those considered unclean, possessed, strange, women who walked alone. Women who were whispered about when the baskets were passed. Mary would become one of those women, not always, but eventually. And before her name became legend, it became a warning, but not yet. For now, she is simply a woman of Magdala, fetching water, grinding grain, kneeling at the edge of the sea. She sees the world in patterns, the weaving of wool, the spiral of fig leaves, the way the sun glitters on scales of fresh caught fish. Break time equals 3 south, greater than these early years, quiet and repetitive, shaped her deeply. They gave her an eye for detail, a rhythm for silence, and perhaps a heart that longed for something more, not more noise, but more meaning, more presence. In a world where women were often overlooked, Mary watched, listened, and waited. She couldn't have known that her name would be spoken by emperors, popes, and mystics, that her face would appear in paintings from Florence to France, that centuries later you would be listening to her story. But tonight, let's let her be just a woman of Galilee, living and waiting. Mary's life with Jesus, healing, following, witnessing the heat of Galilee had changed. The scent of ripe olives filled the air, mingling with the dry dust of the road. Time had passed since Mary walked the shoreline in silence. Now she walked with purpose, because one day perhaps it was at the edge of a crowd, perhaps in the quiet aftermath of a storm she encountered him. The man from Nazareth, the teacher, the healer, the one who saw through veils. His name was Jesus, and her name would never be the same. The Gospel of Luke tells us that for Mary, Jesus cast out 7 demons. What were they? Were they spirits that tormented her mind? A metaphor for illness, or isolation, or sorrow? The text doesn't say. And perhaps that silence is its own kind of protection. What we do know is that something left her, and something else entered in its place. Peace, presence, clarity. From that moment, she followed him, not in the shadow of obligation, but in the light of transformation. She joined the small group of women who provided for Jesus and his disciples out of their own means. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, wife of Herod's steward, Susanna, and others unnamed. They cooked, they walked, they listened. Imagine them together in the morning, gathering herbs, drying figs, wrapping parcels of bread and linen. These were not fragile women. They were resilient, tested, wise. They were the kind of women who could cross deserts barefoot. And Mary, she was there through it all. When the crowds pressed in and Jesus taught from the hillsides, she stood nearby. When children ran forward with curiosity, she offered a quiet smile. When the sick were brought forward and the air thickened with prayer, she watched, waited, and believed. She had already seen the impossible. She had lived it. She had become it. In the moments of travel, when the men were tired and the path was long, Mary stayed. When tension grew, when the teachers of the law murmured against him, she did not argue, she observed. The Gospels give us few words from her, but her silence is full of presence. And then came the days of sorrow, the streets of Jerusalem, the rising danger, the whispers of betrayal, and still she followed to the courtyard, to the base of the cross, to the place of execution. Mary stood there when others had fled. Her heart did not break with noise, it broke in silence. And yet she remained, and early, so very early on the first day of the week, she came to the tomb, not as a mystic, not as a legend, just a woman, carrying spices, carrying grief. But what she found was not what she expected. A stone rolled away, a voice that asked, "Why are you weeping?" And then a name, spoken gently, Mary. And in that instant she knew. Not because she saw light, not because she touched proof, but because she was known. She was the first to witness the resurrection, the first to be sent, the first apostle, sent not with a weapon, but with a message. Go, tell them. And so she did, not as a queen, not as a priest, but as Mary, Mary of Magdala, healed, transformed, witnessed, and witnessing. Her story didn't end there. Though the Gospels fall silent, traditions do not. Some say she traveled to Ephesus. Others say France. Others believe she wandered the wilderness in prayer. But no matter the location, the truth remains. She had seen what others could not, and she had carried it not just on her lips, but in her life. And so we remember her, not for what the world said she was, not for the rumors history painted around her name, but for what she witnessed and how she remained, the woman at the tomb, the first one to believe and the first to be called by name. Mystery and manuscripts, the Gnostic Mary and hidden histories, there are stories. And then there are stories beneath the stories. Tales whispered between lines of scripture, recorded in ink, buried in caves, and carried across centuries by those who refused to forget. Mary of Magdala was not forgotten. Not completely, but the way she was remembered changed. And somewhere along the slow turning of time, her story split. One path became doctrine, the other a mystery. Break time equals 2 south, greater than imagine a desert cave, cool despite the blazing sun outside. Inside, shelves carved into stone, scrolls wrapped in linen, a scent of old papyrus and ancient dust. Now picture someone centuries later, blowing gently across a manuscript, revealing a name, Mary. Among the Gnostic texts, the hidden writings not included in the Bible as we know it, there is a gospel, the Gospel of Mary. It does not begin with miracles, nor end with crucifixion. It begins in conversation. A quiet moment between disciples after the resurrection. The others are confused, afraid, uncertain, and Mary speaks. She tells them what the teacher revealed to her in visions. She speaks of the soul's journey, of ascending past fear, past ignorance, past shame. She speaks with calm and clarity, but not everyone listens. Some of the male disciples question her. Did he really speak with a woman? And yet Peter is silenced. Levi defends her, and Mary continues. Break time equals 3 south greater than. This text, preserved in fragments, offers a Mary unlike the repentant sinner painted by medieval pens. She is calm, centered, wise, not the rescued, but the revealer. Some believe this gospel represents an early tradition, one in which Mary was not only a witness, but a teacher, a mystic, a vessel of hidden knowledge. She speaks of the soul's ascent, of how each level sheds illusion, the burden of the flesh, the chains of desire, the bindings of false authority. She does not name demons, she names fear and overcomes it. This Mary is not begging for redemption, she is offering understanding. Break time equals 2 south greater than, and she is not alone in the lost text. In the Pistis Sophia, Mary is called the woman who understood completely. In other apocryphal writings, she asks the questions no one else dares to ask. Some writings call her the companion of Jesus, a term that stirs curiosity. In the Greek, koinonos can mean partner, in faith, in mission, perhaps more. But we tread softly here, not to sensationalize, but to witness, to imagine. A woman once dismissed, now standing among the scrolls of the sacred. Break time equals 3 south greater than. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the mid-20th century, they reopened old questions. What had been lost? What had been left out? In Nag Hammadi, Egypt, more scrolls were found bound in leather, buried in jars. Among them, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Truth, the Sophia of Jesus Christ, and yes, the Gospel of Mary. These texts don't offer simple answers. They offer layers, symbol, spirit, silence. They speak not of law, but of inner knowing. Not of punishment, but of purification. And in these desert-buried words, Mary's voice still lingers, soft, strong, certain. Break time equals 3 south. It's worth noting that for centuries, many believed Mary Magdalene was a former prostitute, but the Bible never says this. Not once. That association likely began in the 6th century, when Pope Gregory I delivered a sermon that blended Mary of Magdala with the unnamed sinful woman who anointed Jesus' feet. From then on, her legacy shifted. She became the fallen woman, the weeper, the penitent, but the older texts say otherwise. They offer a different kind of Mary, not fallen, but free. A woman who is not silenced, but misheard. And tonight, you are hearing her again, through the hush of history, through fragments and footnotes, through the gentle rhythm of rediscovery. Let her story rise slowly like incense, not demanding attention, just quietly transforming the air. A name remembered now. As your body sinks deeper into rest and your breath begins to slow, you return from the hills of Galilee, from market baskets and quiet fires, from footpaths worn smooth by centuries, from the story of a woman whose name the world once tried to forget, but could not erase. Mary of Magdala, a name spoken by angels, a name called by the risen Christ, a name carried through dusty scrolls and secret libraries, through candlelit cathedrals and forgotten fields. She was not perfect, not untouchable, but she was present. In her presence there was power, the power of witnessing, of standing firm when others ran, of hearing a voice and answering it, of being misunderstood but never misplaced. Break time equals 2 south, greater than Mary walked where few were willing to go, not just to the tomb, but into mystery, into silence, into the realm where spirit meets breath. She bore no crown, she carried no scroll, she led no army, and yet she saw what others could not, and she believed before they understood, and because of that, you are hearing her name tonight. Break time equals 2 south, greater than. So now, let this story become part of your stillness. Let her footsteps echo softly in your memory, not as noise, but as rhythm, not as teaching, but as presence. You are held in the same breath that whispered to her. The same stillness that called her name calls yours too. You are not forgotten. You are not unseen. You too are a witness to your own unfolding, to the divine in the ordinary, to the mystery that lingers just beyond the veil of sleep. Break time equals 3 south, greater than let your limbs grow heavy, like linen laid to dry under a warm sky. Let your thoughts drift, like incense in a temple without walls. And if your mind wanders, let it wander through Galilee, to the shores where the water glistens and a woman waits with quiet knowing in her eyes. Break time equals 2 south, greater than. Sleep now, beloved one. You have walked far tonight. Rest in peace, in presence, and in the gentle knowing that stories like souls can be redeemed, and that your name too is known. Good night. Welcome again, traveler. You've found your way to stillness, where ancient footsteps echo softly through the sands, and whispered stories rise with the wind. Tonight's tale is one of thirst, not just for water, but for something deeper, something eternal. It is a story told beneath a burning sun, but we'll unfold it beneath the stars, slowly, gently, until revelation feels like rest. She was a woman, nameless to some, scorned to many, but chosen by God to be the first to hear something the world had been waiting for. Tonight you'll walk with her to Jacob's well. We'll begin with daily life in Samaria, hot mornings, heavy jars, and quiet isolation. Then we'll step into her story, the conversation that changed everything. We'll pause to wonder, why this woman? Why this hour? What is living water, really? And then we'll contrast her quiet encounter with the loud rejection from the religious elite. Let your breath steady, let your shoulders soften, and come to the well. The sun is high, the world is watching, but here in the silence, truth will be spoken. Daily life in Samaria, jars, stairs, and the weight of the noon sun. Imagine yourself waking in Hagar, a Samaritan town pressed between dusty hills and ancient tradition. The morning begins early before the heat arrives. The air smells of dry earth and crushed olives. Birds stir in the fig trees, And in the homes built of mud, brick, and stone, the rhythm of daily life begins. You are a woman here. Your tasks are many, but they rarely change. Sweep the floor, knead the dough, heat water over a flame. Listen for the breath of children. Keep your eyes low in the street. Most of the women go together to the well at dawn. They walk in a quiet cluster, talking, perhaps laughing softly, filling jars as the sky turns gold. But you do not walk with them. You wait until the sun is high, until the crowds are gone, until the risk of a sideways glance is less than the ache of isolation. At midday, the road is quiet, too hot for chatter, too bright for comfort. Your clay jar is heavy even before it's filled. You carry it anyway. And so you walk step by step toward Jacob's well. The well is old, older than kings, older than the temple, older even than division between Jews and Samaritans. It is a place of meeting, of water, yes, but also of stories. Jacob met Rachel at a well. Moses met Zipporah at a well. Wells are not just about thirst, they are about timing. And so here you are, sweat on your brow, dust on your sandals, jar balanced at your side. You expect silence, you expect solitude. But someone is there. He is Jewish. You can tell from the fringe on his robe. His face is tired from travel, but his eyes, they do not look away. And before you can retreat, before you can lower your gaze, he speaks. Give me a drink. No judgment, no laughter, just need. You pause. Not because you don't have water, but because you don't expect kindness. Not from a man, not from a Jew, not from anyone. And yet he asks, you've carried many things, shame, rumors, names that weren't yours, but now you carry a cup. And something in his voice makes the burden feel different, not lighter, but seen. This is the rhythm of your days, quiet labor, long walks, shadows behind lattice, whispers behind hands. But this moment is not part of the rhythm. It is an interruption, a divine one. But for now, you don't know that. For now, you're simply a woman with a jar at a well in the heat of the day. And you are not alone. Biography, the conversation that changed the world, he doesn't speak loudly. There's no crowd, no miracles, no disciples nearby. Just you and him and the sound of wind over dry stone. Give me a drink, he said. You responded cautiously. How is it that you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink? Centuries of division are packed into that question. The rift between your people is long and bitter. Jews avoid Samaritans. They don't speak to them, certainly not at wells. Certainly not to women, certainly not to you. And yet he stays. If you knew who was speaking to you, he says slowly, you would have asked me, and I would have given you living water. You frown. The well is deep. He has no bucket. What is this living water? You ask cautiously. He replies not with answers, but with mystery. Whoever drinks this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks the water I give will never thirst. It will become in them a spring welling up to eternal life. His voice doesn't rise. He's not selling, persuading, demanding. He's simply inviting. You want that water. Not just because it means fewer walks to the well, but because something in you is tired. Tired of carrying shame. Tired of being alone at midday. Tired of thirsting for something you cannot name. So you say, "Sir, give me this water," and that's when the conversation deepens. "Go," he says. "Call your husband and come back." Your breath catches. You respond carefully, "I have no husband." And gently he nods. You have spoken truth. You've had 5 husbands, and the man you are with now is not your husband. There is no threat in his tone, no accusation, no disgust, just a mirror. A truth-telling, and somehow that feels like mercy. You've never met him. He knows your whole story. Not the one people whisper, but the one you've carried in silence. You shift the conversation nervously, perhaps. You bring up religion, mountains, temples, where worship should happen. And he answers, not as a Jew, not as a Samaritan, but as someone beyond. The time is coming, he says, when true worshipers will worship in spirit and truth, not on this mountain, not in that temple, but from within. And then he says something no one expected. "I am the Messiah," he tells you, not the rabbis, not the priests, not the kings or scholars. You, a woman, a Samaritan, a story surrounded by shame, are the first to hear the truth spoken plainly. "I am he." The disciples return. They are confused. But you don't wait for their questions. You leave your jar, your burden, the thing you came for, and you run back to the village, back to the people who never truly saw you, to tell them, "Come see a man who told me everything I've ever done. Could this be the Messiah?" And because of your voice, your courage, your witness, they came, they listened, and many believed. Not because of doctrine or bloodline or tradition, but because of a woman who met a man at a well in the heat of the day. Mystery. What is living water, and why her? Living water. It's a phrase he used, but what did it mean? The Hebrew scriptures spoke of water in many forms: a gift, a judgment, a symbol of God's Spirit. Prophets described streams in the wilderness, rivers flowing from the temple, and wells springing up in parched lands. But this water, this living water, was different. It wasn't for the body alone. It was meant for the soul. It was refreshment that could not be drawn with a bucket, a spring that rose from within. The rabbis taught that the Torah was like water, life-giving, cleansing, sustaining. They said those who studied it deeply drank from God's wisdom, but he wasn't offering her a scroll, or a sermon, or a set of rules. He was offering her presence, a divine presence that could dwell within, a presence that would quench what nothing else had: shame, loneliness, longing, the ache to be known and still loved. And why her? Why not a scholar? Why not a priest? Why not someone with a cleaner story? Maybe because she knew thirst, because she didn't pretend not to need, because her life had carved out the space where a living water could finally flow. There's a mystery too in when he spoke to her. It was midday, not the hour of prayer, not the Sabbath, not during a feast or festival, But in the heat, in the silence, in the margin of the ordinary day, divinity appeared. Not in thunder, not in lightning, not in temple splendor, but in a quiet voice beside an old well, speaking to a woman whose name we were never given. There is also mystery in what she left behind, the jar, the symbol of her daily task, her reason for coming, her burden. She left it behind. Why? Maybe because she no longer needed to carry what she once did. Maybe because she became the vessel instead, carrying the message, carrying the water, carrying the word. That is the mystery of living water. It flows into empty places. It rises in the silence. It finds those who are overlooked and fills them until they overflow. The woman at the well, V.S., the religious elite, she met him at a well, quietly, unexpectedly, with no position, no invitation, no preparation, and yet he revealed himself. Contrast that moment with the ones who were supposed to see clearly, the scribes, the Pharisees, the ones with scrolls and seats of honor. They asked for signs. She simply listened. They debated his lineage. She ran to tell others. To them, he spoke in parables. To her, he spoke plainly. To them, he posed questions they couldn't answer. To her, he answered the deepest one before she asked. They brought stones. She brought testimony. They clung to control. She dropped her jar. The religious elite were protectors of tradition, guardians of purity. They knew the law, upheld the festivals, recited the prayers, but many of them missed the presence, the living, breathing word standing in front of them. And she, a woman, a Samaritan, unaccompanied and unclean in their eyes, she became the first evangelist. It was not the temple, but the well. Not the priest, but the outcast. Not the scrolls, but the silence that held the sacred revelation. This contrast is more than social commentary. It's spiritual rhythm. It reminds us that God often speaks in the unexpected moment, to the unexpected person with unexpected grace. The woman at the well had no authority, but she had experience. She encountered truth living, breathing, transformative, and that was enough. More than robes, more than rituals, more than titles or heritage, she walked away not with status, but with truth. And that was all she needed. The well is quiet again. The sun has shifted. Shadows stretch long across the stones, and the woman is gone. But her presence lingers, the echo of her footsteps, the ripple of her story. A woman with no name in the text, and yet her voice carries across time, not loud, but clear. In her story, there is no thunder, no parting seas, no mighty battles, only a conversation. One moment, at a well, but for her, it changed everything. She came with a jar seeking water for the day. She left with a witness carrying water for the world. And maybe that's how the divine meets us most often, not in spectacle, but in stillness, not in power, but in presence, not in those the world celebrates, but in those it overlooks. Tonight, as you rest, may you remember her story, not as a symbol of shame, but of clarity, courage, and calling. May you find your own well, your quiet place, your gentle encounter, your moment of living water. May the voices that once silenced you grow still. And may the voice that knows your name rise gently in the night, soft, true, and full of grace. Sleep well, you are seen. You are known, and you are never alone. The Transfiguration, light on the mountain, welcome. You've come to a sacred height, a mountain not marked on any map, but remembered in whispers and wonder. Tonight, we rise slowly, step by step through the thinning air of holy encounter, to a place where time folds in on itself, where past, present, and eternity meet in silence and light. This is a story of radiant transformation, of three figures: Jesus, Elijah, and Moses, and the mystery that bound them together on one unforgettable mountaintop. But before the light, there was the climb, and before the voice, there was the hush. Tonight's journey will unfold gently across 4 segments. First, we'll walk through the daily world of Jesus' disciples, their footsteps, their fears, their longings. Then we'll enter the Transfiguration moment itself, a vision so intense it left even the boldest apostles speechless. After that, we'll reflect on the mystery and meaning of this sacred moment, how light revealed what words could not. And finally, we'll contrast the quiet awe on the mountain with the noise of the crowds waiting below. Let your breath settle. Let your shoulders soften. Let the stillness open like dawn. You are invited to climb now into the light. Daily life with the teacher. Imagine the dust of Galilee clinging to your sandals. The low murmur of voices as crowds gather, not just for miracles, but for something they couldn't name. You are a disciple, following a teacher whose words cut deeper than scripture, yet soothe like water in the desert. Every morning, you wake before the sun. Fishermen, zealots, tax collectors, you walk side by side, bound not by status but by call. Jesus doesn't lead like the rabbis. He walks slowly. He notices birds, children, fig trees, and forgotten women. He weeps. He laughs. He disappears into hills at night to pray. Sometimes you understand him. Sometimes you don't. You've seen him still the sea. You've heard demons cry out. You've watched the religious leaders bristle with rage. But then he says strange things. Like, take up your cross. Like, the first shall be last. And most recently, that he must suffer. The air has grown heavy. A kind of holy tension follows your every step. And now, he has chosen just 3 of you, Peter, James, and John. He says, come. You don't ask why. You climb, 1 foot, then the next. The sky grows brighter, the ground's deeper, and something in your chest begins to stir. You don't know it yet, but heaven is about to open. Not in the temple, not in the city, but here on this wild, forgotten mountain. When you're ready, we'll step into the moment of light. But it is final. When the cloud lifts, Elijah is gone. Moses is gone. Only Jesus remains, but he is no longer glowing. Just a man standing on a mountain with dust on his feet and forever in his eyes. When you're ready, we'll explore the mystery of what this moment truly means. What really happened on that mountain? Was it a glimpse into the future, a memory of the beginning, or something beyond time altogether? Theologians would wrestle with it for centuries. Artists would try to paint it, light on robes, halos and gold leaf, faces turned upward in awe. But those who were there, they couldn't explain it. They could only remember. The Transfiguration wasn't about proof. It was about presence. Not an answer, but a revealing. Jesus stood with the law and the prophets, with Moses and Elijah, but surpassed them both in silence. His light didn't come from the sun, it came from within, as if the veil between heaven and earth had parted, just for a moment. For those disciples, the mountain was a turning point. Before it, Jesus was the teacher, the healer, the wanderer. After it, he was something more, still human, still touchable, but also uncontainable. The voice from the cloud didn't say, "Watch him," it said, "Listen," because this wasn't about spectacle. It was about surrender. Mystics would later say that all true revelation feels like light, that when God draws near, it doesn't burn, it reveals. And that's what this was. Not magic, not illusion, but a revealing. When you're ready, we'll descend the mountain and see how that glow contrasts with the chaos waiting below. You thought the mountain would change everything, that after seeing that, the world would bend, bow, shift in reverence. But when you descend, you find chaos. A boy convulsing, a crowd arguing, the other disciples overwhelmed, powerless to cast out a spirit. And suddenly, the light of the mountaintop feels distant, like a dream swallowed by noise. This is the contrast. Revelation and reality, glory and grit. On the mountain, Jesus transfigured. Below it, Jesus tested. Peter wanted to build tents and stay, but Jesus always walks down the mountain, because the point of light is not to avoid the darkness, but to carry it into it. The religious leaders still don't believe. Rome still holds power, and the cross is now closer than ever. But something is different, not in the world, but in you. You've seen him radiant. You've heard the voice. You know now, he is more than a teacher. He is the meeting point between heaven and earth. And the path he walks, you will walk it too. Not always with clarity, not always with light, but with a knowing that somewhere benoise the mountain still glows. The light that lingers tonight, you witnessed a moment few ever have, not a miracle for the crowds, but a mystery meant for the close ones, the ones who climbed, the ones who stayed, the ones who listened. You saw Jesus not just as he was, but as he truly is. The veil lifted, the heavens opened, the word made visible, and now You return to your quiet room, your quiet breath, your quiet wondering. What does it mean to be transformed? Not once, not only on the mountain, but again and again and again, in the silence of your spirit, in the flicker of your faith, in the ordinary glow of being fully seen. The transfiguration wasn't just a moment in time, it was a mirror, an invitation to remember that glory can shine through dust, and the divine often chooses mountains of silence over temples of noise. As you rest now, let that light settle into your bones. Let it wash through your dreams, and may you wake with just a little more wonder than before. Sleep well. Welcome. You've arrived at the edge of something ancient, a hush between heaven and earth, a time before the flood when the sky held secrets and the watchers still looked down. This is not a tale of noise and fury. It is quiet, woven in whispers. A soft unfolding of rebellion, and remembrance. Tonight, we drift into the story of Enoch, a man who walked with God and vanished from earth. A man who wrote what he saw in dreams and in the deep. We will not hurry. Instead, we will float through the days before the waters rose, through the slow descent of the divine, through the quiet warnings carved into stone. We'll begin with the world Enoch knew, a world turning, a people building, a sky growing restless. Then we'll walk with him slowly into the visions. Fallen ones, named and numbered, mountains split, oaths made and broken. Later we'll pause to wonder, how did this hidden book survive? What did the ancient scrolls say that others feared? And finally, we'll lift our eyes to the contrast, the people of the flood, the prophets who warned, and the angels who watched too long. Breathe in slowly. Let yourself rest. Let the stars come close. And as sleep begins to stir at the edges of your thoughts, we enter the world of the Watchers, daily life in Enoch's world. Imagine yourself standing on cool, dew-covered ground just before sunrise. The trees around you are taller than any you've seen, ancient, gnarled, and heavy with mist. The wind stirs the high branches, and in the distance, the slow, rhythmic thud of wooden tools against stone echoes like a heartbeat through the valley. This is a time before cities, before kingdoms, before Moses or Abraham. You are in the world as it once was, a world of beginnings. Enoch's world is old, not in years, but in silence. The air is thick with the scent of soil, firewood, and river clay. There are no streets, no temples, only paths worn by feet and time. People live in small cluster stone dwellings tucked into hillsides, woven huts beside slow rivers. Fires are kept burning not just for warmth, but for survival. The day begins with gathering. Roots, berries, grains, what the land will give. Men shape tools from bone and flint. Women grind grain with smooth stones, their hands moving in practiced rhythmic circles. There is no metal yet, no written law. Only stories pass from elder to child beside the firelight. And among these early families, there are those who remember more. The old ones speak of the sky, of beings that once came down, and beings that should not have. They speak in soft tones about stars that moved strangely and voices in the wind. Enoch would have grown up listening, watching the animals move in patterns, the rivers swell and recede, the moon wax and wane like breath. He noticed things others missed, the way trees leaned when no wind was present, the dreams that came not from hunger, but from elsewhere. He did not live as a king or warrior. He was a walker, a watcher, a man of quiet habits and deep attentiveness. He kept track of days. He marked seasons. He counted constellations not to control time, but to understand the one who set it in motion. And while others tilled fields or raised herds, Enoch wandered. He sat beside streams and listened to the earth. He spoke with elders, and sometimes it is said, with angels. The book of Genesis tells us very little, that Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more. But the book of the Watchers, an older, stranger text, tells a longer tale. A tale of descent, of warnings, of heavenly beings who loved what they should not. Before that story, though, before rebellion, there was quiet, a world turning slowly, a man observing, and the wind whispering something new. Just beneath the silence, Enoch's visions and the fall of the Watchers, it began, they say, on Mount Hermon, a tall, snow-capped summit where clouds cling like secrets, and where a group of angels, 200 in all, descended, clothed in light and longing. They were called the Watchers, charged with observing humanity, but never touching. But desire can blur boundaries, even in heaven. These angels, led by one named Simaza, looked upon the daughters of men and saw beauty. They did not fall suddenly. They fell slowly, in decisions, in whispers, in oaths sworn in secret. They bound themselves in agreement to take wives, to descend fully, to bear children not of this world. And so they did. The Book of the Watchers, preserved in fragments in the hills of Ethiopia, describes what came next with eerie calm. These beings taught forbidden things: alchemy, enchantment, root cutting, weapon making. They taught how to read the stars, not to worship the Creator, but to manipulate creation. They painted eyes with crushed stones, carved symbols into weapons, melted ore to make war, and their children, giants, grew beyond all bounds. The earth cried out under their weight. Blood soaked the ground. Beasts were twisted. Balance was undone, and Enoch saw it all in dreams, in visions, in strange journeys led by heavenly guides. He was taken through the skies, past walls of fire and rivers of judgment, to see the place where these angels would be chained. He heard their cries, saw their shame, watched them beg him to intercede, to speak to the Most High. But Enoch said nothing. He only listened, recorded, walked in silence, as the heavens mourned. In one vision, he saw the flood, a cleansing wave that would reset what was broken. But long before the rain came the silence, and in that silence he wrote, not just for his generation, but for the last, for a world that would forget the Watchers, but still feel their shadows. Enoch never returned to the dust. That's what makes his story different. not a death, but a disappearance, not a burial, but a taking. Enoch walked with God and then he was not. The ancient texts say he was lifted, that he entered the realms where mortals fear to tread and became more than man. But he left something behind, a book, or perhaps many books, scrolls etched with symbols older than Hebrew. Speaking of watchers, wanderers, and the return of divine order, the Book of the Watchers is only one part of this mystery. Other writings like the Book of Secrets, the Book of Parables, the Astronomical Book, all trace their roots back to Enoch. These texts whisper of cosmic battles, layers of heaven, and a future reckoning with those who still distort the divine order. Some say the church hid these writings. Others say they were lost or protected for a time when eyes would be ready to see. But in Ethiopia, among the oldest Christian communities, Enoch's voice was preserved, held sacred, not as myth but as memory. Why? Because Enoch's words speak not only of the past, but of patterns. They echo what many sense but cannot name, that what felt still moves, that some knowledge was never meant for open hands. And yet the mystery remains. Why Enoch? Why him? Perhaps because he listened when others spoke. Perhaps because he walked when others slept. Perhaps because some truths only whisper, and he had the silence to hear. The hidden book is not just parchment. It is the soul of one who watched the watchers and kept walking into light.
Contrast the sons of heaven vs the sons of earth in the hush of ancient time, long before kings wore crowns or prophets cried out in temple courts. A deeper contrast stirred beneath the surface of the earth and sky. Two lineages, two loyalties, two ways of walking. The sons of God, those called the Watchers, looked upon the daughters of men, and in that moment desire eclipsed duty. They descended. Not with war, but with wonder, they taught, gave, revealed metals, roots, incantations. It seemed like knowledge, but it carried weight. These fallen ones once heavenly mingled with flesh, and from that union came the Nephilim, giants, not only in stature, but in disruption. Meanwhile, the sons of earth, the human ones, kept planting, kept building, kept praying, though their voices cracked beneath the sky. And in the shadow of rebellion, a quiet man walked with God. He didn't command armies. He didn't build towers. He didn't strive to rise. He simply walked. While the watchers fell from light into secrecy, Enoch rose into silence. Where they broke trust, he kept it. Where they scattered wisdom like fire, he guarded it with reverence. He did not worship the stars, but understood their order. He did not command spirits, but listened for whispers beyond the veil. In every era, there are watchers. There are those who seek control, cloaked as enlightenment, and those who surrender control, stepping into mystery. Enoch walked alone, but not abandoned. The contrast could not be more stark. Fallen messengers versus a faithful man, those who came down by choice, versus the one who was taken up in grace. And you, in the quiet of your night, may find yourself somewhere between, longing to know, afraid to fall, called to walk. Let the final moments of this tale bring you rest.
The world turns slowly. Above us, stars still blink with secrets. Beneath us, stones still hold the weight of ancient footsteps. And somewhere in between are stories like this, of watchers and wanderers, of those who looked too long, and one man who walked with God until he was no more. Enoch did not build a kingdom. He did not conquer lands. He simply listened, watched, recorded what he saw, and trusted the silence. Tonight, as you lie still beneath your own ceiling of stars, you carry that same invitation to walk with wonder, to ask without fear, to trust that some mysteries are not lost, only resting. And though the watchers fell, Enoch grows. May your dreams tonight be filled not with fear, but with awe, not with answers, but with presence. And if you listen closely, beneath the hum of breath and the hush of night, you just might hear it, the echo of wings, the turning of a page, and the footsteps of a faithful one still walking. Sleep well, beloved seeker. End of the Book of the Watchers. Welcome. You've arrived at a quiet edge of the world, ... A place of gold dust, slow caravans, and questions that echo across desert winds. Tonight, we follow a queen. Her name is remembered, but not always understood. The Queen of Sheba, a traveler, a ruler, a seeker of wisdom who once crossed scorching sands to stand before the wisest man on earth. This is not a story of war or conquest. It is a story of presence, of inquiry, of sacred wonder, shared between two souls beneath carved cedar beams. In tonight's journey, we will walk through a world perfumed with frankincense and shaded by palm leaves. Then we'll travel beside her through ancient kingdoms and whispered riddles. We'll peer into legend and listen for the ark. And finally, we will compare the silent grace of Sheba's journey to the thunder of Solomon's court. Breathe deeply. Let the heat soften your limbs. Let the stillness take root. And let's begin with the rhythms of her daily world. Daily life in Sheba, imagine the sound of camels. Soft, rhythmic steps across the hot, packed earth. Their bells jingling like wind chimes in slow motion. You are deep in the Arabian desert. In the ancient kingdom of Saba, what we now call Yemen or Ethiopia, depending on the telling. This was the land of Sheba, a land shaped by sunlight and sand, by terraced hillsides and trade routes that stretched toward the Red Sea, a place where incense trees bled fragrant resin, and gold was not rare, but refined. The queen's world began with ritual. At dawn, handmaidens would pour rosewater into polished basins. Curtains dyed deep crimson would sway gently in the breeze as servants moved in silence, preparing sweet dates, honeyed bread, and thick black coffee brewed with cardamom. Her robes would be layered linen and silk soft to the touch, yet commanding in hue. Adorned in gold cuffs and lapis lazuli, she walked with a slow grace, not hurried, but deliberate. A ruler and a woman shaped by rhythm. The palace grounds echoed with both power and peace. Stonemasons chipped away at intricate reliefs, while women threaded jasmine into garlands, their laughter low and musical. Each morning she listened to ministers reading trade reports, shipments of myrrh, shipments of spices, to astronomers charting stars and moon paths, to whispers from priests about omens, about dreams. But this queen did not rule with superstition alone. She watched, she calculated, and she prepared. For beyond her kingdom's splendor, the Queen of Sheba understood something rare, that wealth fades, but wisdom endures. And so she studied, Ancient texts, scrolls, oral tales. She memorized proverbs. She posed riddles to her council. She held council beneath a canopy of fig trees, where even the breeze bowed to her curiosity. There was silence in her strength. And yet, there was a whisper, a question that returned each night as she lay beneath woven linen. Is there one wiser? Is there a light beyond the edge of my kingdom? When she heard tales of a man in Jerusalem, Solomon, son of David, whose mind reflected the very wisdom of the divine, she did not hesitate. She gathered her treasures, her scrolls, her questions, and began to prepare for a journey not just across distance, but across understanding. Break time equals 3 south, greater than the days in Sheba were wrapped in warmth and sound. The rustle of palm fronds, the shimmer of gold coins, the hum of bees around citrus blossoms. But beneath it all, there was a stirring, a gentle urgency, a knowing that to rule well, one must seek deeper truth. And so, with camels packed, attendants gathered, and riddles written on parchment, the Queen of Sheba turned her face to the north and began the long, quiet journey toward wisdom. Biography, her arrival, questions for Solomon, and spiritual insights. The sun rose slowly over the hills of Judah, casting long golden light across stone walls and olive trees. Inside the city of Jerusalem, rumors stirred before the gates even opened. Merchants whispered of a caravan on the horizon. Dust clouds hung in the air like smoke. It was not war. It was something else entirely. She had come, the Queen of Sheba regal, veiled, bearing treasures, approached with quiet command. Her procession wound through narrow roads, camels adorned with crimson tassels, and men bearing gifts so rare they caught the light like fire. Frankincense, gold, carved ivory, polished onyx, and something even more valuable, questions. Solomon, king of Israel, was known for many things. His wealth, his wives, his horses, his temple, but above all, his wisdom. It was said he could read the heart of a man like one reads a scroll. It was said God had spoken to him in dreams. And so she came, not as a subject, not as a rival, but as a seeker. In the quiet of his stone palace, the air rich with cedar and incense, she sat across from him, and they talked. No fanfare, no court politics, just riddles and insight, questions and parables, an unfolding of minds like petals in bloom. The ancient texts say there was no question too hard for the king to answer, but she did not come to be impressed. She came to be matched, and when she saw the way his servants moved, the food at his table, the robes of the priests, the design of the temple, she did not envy him. She blessed him. Softly and with conviction, she said, "Blessed be the Lord your God, who delighted in you, to set you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, he made you king to do justice and righteousness." This moment, often passed over in quick readings, was profound. A foreign queen speaking divine blessing over the house of David. No conflict, no debate, just reverence, and perhaps recognition. It's said that she gave Solomon 120 talents of gold. That's nearly 4 tons. But her true gift was deeper, a mirror for Solomon's soul. A reminder that wisdom isn't just found in answers, but in the courage to seek them. Break time equals 3 south, greater than their conversations may have stretched late into the night by lamplight and under stars. Some say she tested him with riddles like, what is the strongest thing in the world? Or what increases the more it is shared? Others say she asked about the nature of the soul, the path to righteousness, the silence of God, and Solomon answered not just with knowledge, but with listening. There is a sacredness when two leaders meet not to conquer, but to commune, and when it was time to depart, she did not leave unchanged. Whether she stayed weeks or months, the Queen of Sheba left with more than she brought, and in her heart, perhaps not just admiration, but alignment, a shared devotion to wisdom, a quiet awe before the divine. She would return to her kingdom bearing Solomon's words like seed in the desert, words that would ripple through generations. And some say she returned with something more, but that is a mystery. Mystery Ethiopian legends, her son Menelik, and the ark, even after her caravan vanished into the southern horizon. Her story lingered. The Bible offers only a few lines about her departure, but the echoes of her journey grew into legend. In Ethiopia, where the hills are carved with stone churches and the air smells of roasted coffee and frankincense, the Queen of Sheba is not just remembered, she is revered. There she is called Makeda, and the story changes. They say she did not return alone. They say she bore a son, a child of union between two wisdom seekers, Solomon and Sheba. His name was Menelik, and he, like his mother, would one day journey to Jerusalem, but not as a seeker, as a descendant. The Ethiopian text, known as the Kebra-Nagast, the glory of the kings, tells of a sacred inheritance. It claims Menelik was welcomed by Solomon, honored and loved. But after a time, he was sent home, and he did not return empty-handed. According to legend, Menelik took with him something more sacred than gold. He took the Ark of the Covenant. Yes, the very ark said to contain the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, said to be surrounded by angels, said to be so holy it can never be touched. The story says Solomon allowed it, or perhaps God ordained it, that the ark found its resting place not in the temple, but in Axum, Ethiopia. To this day, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church claims that the ark rests there still, guarded night and day by a single priest who may never leave the chapel. No one has seen it, and perhaps that's the point. For in the silence of mystery, faith breathes. Break time equals 3 south, greater than Makeda, Queen of Sheba, is honored not just as a queen, but as the mother of nations, a matriarch of divine lineage. Her image appears in Ethiopian art, her story woven into hymns, her name whispered in prayers. Some say her visit to Solomon was the spark that carried monotheism southward, that her wisdom became a seed planted in African soil. And others say that the union between Sheba and Solomon was not physical at all, but spiritual. A sacred alchemy between minds aligned, souls seeking God together. There is no proof, no scroll preserved in gold, no stone tablet etched with truth. Only whispers, legends, and the lingering scent of incense in desert air. But perhaps that is enough. For the Queen of Sheba, whether mother of Menelik or simply a mystic traveler, stands as a symbol of sacred curiosity, of divine femininity, of wisdom that crosses borders and blesses all it touches. Break time equals 3 south, greater than her mysteries not meant to be solved, but sat with, held gently, like warm sand through open fingers. Contrast Solomon's court, Jerusalem vs. Sheba. Divine vs. earthly wisdom. The Queen of Sheba's journey was not just physical, it was a crossing of worlds. To walk through Jerusalem in Solomon's day was to be surrounded by magnificence, ivory thrones, golden shields, robes dyed purple from distant coasts. The temple gleamed like a crown upon the city, built with precision, layered in meaning. Its inner sanctum was a place even kings could not enter freely. Every morning, Solomon's court stirred with activity. Advisors whispered, servants rushed. The rhythms of power played like a well-rehearsed song. He ruled from a place of abundance. Silver was said to be as common as stone. He had fleets of ships. He had alliances, wives, treaties. He had everything, and yet he received her, not as an inconvenience, but as a mirror. For Sheba brought her own kind of wealth, not of conquest, but of presence. Not of buildings, but of insight. Her kingdom, far to the south, whether in Yemen or Ethiopia, was a land shaped by trade winds and storytelling, by desert stars and wells dug by hand. Her wisdom was quiet, observational, rooted in survival, womanhood, and the deep knowing born from watching seasons change. In Solomon's Jerusalem, she saw the grandeur of a people blessed, but in Sheba, she carried the grace of a people listening, 2 cultures, 2 monarchs, one divine thread running through them both. Break time equals 3 south, greater than, and so we begin to see a deeper contrast. Earthly wisdom seeks dominion. Divine wisdom seeks understanding. One builds towers. The other sits in silence. One gathers answers. The other learns which questions to ask. Solomon, for all his knowledge, would one day falter, his heart pulled toward other gods. His kingdom strained, but Sheba, she returned home, intact, honored, uncompromised, and that we find a whisper of something eternal. That spiritual authority doesn't always come with armies or temples. Sometimes it comes riding on a camel's back, wrapped in silence, bearing questions like gifts. Sheba's journey reminds us, true wisdom is not loud. It listens, it travels. It crosses deserts to meet with what is sacred. Break time equals 3 south, greater than the grandeur of Solomon would be remembered. But the quiet strength of Sheba would endure. Through legend, through lineage, through a story told beneath stars, a story you are now part of. Whenever you pause to seek, to wonder, to ask something no one else is asking, you echo her spirit. And so the caravan fades. The camels rest beneath quiet stars. The gold is unwrapped. The incense has burned low. And the Queen of Sheba returns to her world. But something in her has changed. And something in us changes too when we sit with her story. She came not for spectacle, but for substance. Not for answers, but for wisdom. She crossed deserts not in search of power, but to meet its source. Not a king, but the voice of God whispered through insight, etched into silence, resting in the rhythm between question and reply. Her story teaches us wisdom is a pilgrimage. It does not shout. It does not boast. It walks softly through royal courts and dusty roads alike. It dresses in linen or in silk, but always it listens. And maybe tonight, as you lie beneath your own canopy of stars, beneath ceilings instead of skies, you too are on a journey. Maybe it's not marked by spice roots or sacred riddles, but by your own quiet seeking. You're longing for something deeper than answers. Let that longing stay with you. Let it rock you gently, like the swaying of the Queen's caravan. Let your breath settle, let your thoughts wander, and let the mysteries rest for now. Because in the stillness, in the soft hush of night, wisdom comes. Thank you for walking with her. Sleep well, dear traveler. You're seen. You are safe, and like Sheba, you are guided. Good night. Welcome. You've come to rest in a quiet place, where water moves slowly across memory, and time itself drifts like mist over the deep. Tonight we go far back, to a world covered in silence and storm, to a vessel sealed with pitch, floating on the edge of everything. This is not the Noah's Ark you may remember from childhood. No cartoon animals, no rush of rainbows. This is the long, slow story of survival, of solitude, and of sacred waiting. We'll begin with life before the flood, what people ate, how they lived, what the world might have looked like. Then we'll step into Noah's life, the building, the gathering, the rain. After that, we'll explore the mysteries, the shape of the ark, the symbolism of the dove, the echoes in ancient cultures. And finally, we'll look at the contrast, those who laughed and ignored the signs, and those who floated in silence, cradled in wood. Let your breath deepen, let your shoulders soften, let the water carry you as we begin before the flood. Segment 1. Life before the flood. Imagine yourself in a world untouched by cities. There are no paved roads, no carved monuments, just vast plains, rich soil, and rivers threading through everything like veins. The sun is strong, but the air is mild. Fruit trees grow wild, animals graze in herds, unafraid of people. This is the antediluvian world before the deluge, a time when humans lived long lives, some say centuries. They built with their hands, hunted with patience, planted with care. But the rhythm of life was uneven, where some created tools and homes, others built weapons. Villages became kingdoms, and kingdoms forgot their place in the story. People lived near rivers and lakes. They fished with woven baskets, gathered figs and barley, and raised goats and sheep. The fire was sacred, shared in circles at night. Stories were told of stars, of spirits, of beginnings. And yet, something shifted. Whispers tell of growing violence, not just war, but indifference. The strong took what they wanted, the poor were forgotten. Altars were built, but not to the Creator. The earth itself seemed to grieve. Storms came more often. Animals changed their paths, and the people, so full of pride, did not notice. But one man did, a man who watched the sky, who listened to silence, who believed the voice that came when the world had stopped listening. His name was Noah. He was a quiet man, not a preacher, not a warrior, just a builder, a father, a man who walked with God while others walked away. He planted vineyards. He carved wood with care. He taught his sons how to read the wind and how to honor the earth. And while the world around him laughed or looked away, Noah began to build, but that comes later. For now, remember this world ripe with potential, yet soaked in sorrow. A world waiting for rain and a family preparing, not for war, but for water. Noah's story. Noah did not wake one day with a blueprint in his hand. The ark wasn't born from impulse or imagination. It was instruction, quiet, precise, divine. It began with a whisper, a prompting in the night, and a task so vast, so strange, that most would have doubted it. But Noah listened. Build, he was told. Build an ark of gopher wood, 3 decks, with a window near the top and a door on the side. He didn't rush. He didn't protest. He gathered timber, measured planks, shaped the hull. Year after year, he carved in silence. Neighbors likely watched from a distance, curious at first, then mocking. There was no sea nearby, no signs of a storm. Why build something so large? Why work so hard on what seemed like madness? But Noah kept going. Each board a prayer, each nail a testimony of trust. His family worked beside him, his wife, his sons, their wives. They tied ropes, sealed cracks with pitch, hoisted beams in the sun. As the ark took shape, so did the calling. Pairs of animals began to appear, not suddenly, but slowly. Birds, oxen, deer, creeping things, drawn as if by invisible thread. Inside, the ark grew quiet. Hay was stacked. Clay pots filled with dried grains and dates. Feathers drifted in the stale, still air. And then rain, not a drizzle, but a long, sighing exhale from the sky. 40 days. 40 nights. The windows of heaven opened and the fountains of the deep burst forth. The ark groaned as it lifted from the earth. Noah stood near the door, perhaps holding his wife's hand, watching everything they'd known disappear beneath rising water. The animals stirred, the wind howled, and still the rain fell. Inside the ark, it was dim, smelled of cedar, fir, and old earth. There were no windows to the storm, only the creak of timbers, the lowing of animals, and silence between the tears. Time passed, not just days, but weeks, months. The rain stopped, but the waters did not recede right away. The ark floated alone, a speck in a drowned world. Inside, patience were thin. Food needed rationing. Hope came slowly, if at all. And still Noah waited, until one day a raven flew out, then a dove. It returned empty. Noah waited 7 more days, sent it again. This time it came back with something in its beak, an olive leaf, a breath of green, a whisper that dry land lived again. Noah's eyes must have filled with tears. The dove had spoken not in words, but in branches. He waited again, 1 more week, and sent it out a 3rd time. It did not return. The sky had cleared. The waters had receded. The door of the ark creaked open, and for the first time in over a year, Noah stepped onto the earth. Not the same earth, not the same man. He built an altar, not for safety, not for success, but for gratitude, for survival, for the quiet miracle of a leaf, Contrast Noah vs. the world before the rain. There was noise. The world Noah knew was not peaceful. It was loud with ambition, violence, and unchecked desire. The early chapters of Genesis describe a time when boundaries were ignored between heaven and earth, neighbor and self, sacred and profane. People built cities, shaped tools, sang songs of conquest. Their hands were skilled, but their hearts had wandered far. Noah, by contrast, is described with a whisper of reverence, a righteous man, blameless in his generation, who walked with God. While others raced ahead, Noah listened. While cities expanded, he carved wood in silence. It wasn't that he was perfect, but he was consistent. A man who stayed rooted when the world rushed past. Imagine the ridicule. Building a vessel for an unseen flood. Hauling trees, pitch, and planks under a clear blue sky. Explaining something no one had ever experienced to people who weren't asking. The world celebrated progress. Noah preached patience. The people of his time lived fast. Noah prepared slowly. And then the doors of the ark closed. The contrast was sealed. Outside, water churned with fear and regret. Inside, there was stillness, tension, yes, but also the hum of life continuing two by two. And after the flood, when the waters receded, the contrast grew sharper still. The world outside had been reset, but the echoes of its old ways remained. Noah planted a vineyard. He drank from it. And even in this post-flood peace, imperfection crept back in. There were still misunderstandings, still curses, still humanity. The ark had saved them from destruction, but not from being human. This is the subtle contrast Scripture draws. Divine judgment versus divine mercy, destruction and recreation, noise and the hush of a second chance. In Noah's life, we see both the fragility and the strength of faith, the willingness to wait and the reality of what comes after the waiting. It is not perfection, but presence. It is not clarity, but covenant. And perhaps that's all that was ever promised. So now we return from the waves and the waiting, from the groaning wood of the ark, from the soft flutter of wings and the silence of a sky finally cleared. Noah's story is not just about survival, it is about the slow return to peace, the tender patience it takes to trust again after everything has changed. We see a man who waited, who watched, who dared to believe that dry ground would come again beneath his feet. And when it did, he did not run. He paused, he built an altar, and gave thanks. Tonight, as you drift into your own quiet waters, let the story of Noah remind you that the storms don't last forever, that the ark, however small or unseen, can carry you through, that the dove still returns with hope in its beak. Even if the journey is long, let your breath slow, let your thoughts soften, and let this truth settle gently. Peace doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it's just a leaf. Sleep well, traveler of old stories. You are held, you are covered, and you are never forgotten. Good night. Welcome back. You've arrived in the quiet again, where candlelight flickers across ancient stones, and stories rise like incense from long-forgotten places. Tonight's tale begins not in peace, but in waiting, not in comfort, but in absence, and not in obedience, but in longing. This is the story of the golden calf, a story of people who had seen miracles but still felt abandoned, of a mountain covered in cloud and a leader gone too long, of fear turned into worship, of longing turned into idolatry. We begin in the wilderness, a place of dust and distance. Then we'll follow the story itself. As the people grow restless, as gold melts and silence is broken, we'll pause to explore the mystery. What was the golden calf? Where did the idea come from? And what does it mean to shape a god with our own hands? Then we'll contrast the noise at the base of the mountain with the thunder in the heavens. And with Moses standing between judgment and mercy, let yourself settle in as we descend the slopes of Sinai and into the hearts of a people searching for something to hold. Daily life, campfires, clouds, and the wilderness between. Imagine yourself in the wilderness. Not the green wilderness of forests or rivers, but a dry, open land, where the air shifts like a veil and the earth crunches beneath your sandals. It is quiet, but never truly still. Wind moves across the dunes, carrying dust and memory, and above you always is the cloud. The pillar that led them from Egypt still hovers in the sky, by day a guiding shade, by night a fire that flickers in silence. You are among the people of Israel, camped at the foot of Mount Sinai. The tents are many, arranged like petals around the mountain's base. There's no city here, no walls, no towers, only fabric and dust and longing. Break time equals 2 south, greater than daily life was marked by motion, even in stillness. Each morning you would rise to the sound of gathering, families collecting manna, the soft wafer-like bread that coated the ground like dew. It was quiet work, humble, done in the early light before the sun grew too harsh. Fires were kindled with careful hands, pots were placed on smooth stones, children stirred beside their mothers, and elders whispered blessings to the rising light. There were no gardens, no vineyards, only what was carried and what was given. Break time equals 2 south, greater than you would see Moses sometimes climbing the mountain, disappearing into mist. And you would wait, always wait. He had brought you out of Egypt, through parted seas and crashing waves. You saw the miracles with your own eyes, the staff turned serpent, the water from rock, the Red Sea like walls of glass on either side. But now the mountain waits too. Days pass, then weeks. The cloud at the summit pulses with light. Thunder hums like a heartbeat. But Moses does not return. Break time equals 2 south, greater than tension begins to settle in the camp. You feel it in the silence between families. And the questions pass like bread from tent to tent. How long has it been? Did something happen? Is he ever coming back? The rhythm of daily life, once shaped by Moses' leadership, begins to wobble. There are no new instructions, no fresh direction, just routine and the ache of waiting. And so people begin to look for answers elsewhere. Break time equals 2 south, greater than it begins with a conversation, a whisper, a murmur, a suggestion. If Moses is gone, then what now? They don't reject God. Not fully. They just want something they can see, something they can hold. And so a new rhythm begins, not of trust, but of gathering gold. from earrings, rings, bangles, given freely, melted silently. In the very camp where manna once fell like grace, they begin to shape a new god, a god of their own making. The calf, the fire, and Moses' descent, the fire crackles. Not the fire of divine presence on the mountaintop, but the fire of impatience fed by human hands. At its center, a mold. And into it, gold flows, earrings, bracelets, family heirlooms from Egypt, melted down and reshaped into something new. A calf, a young bull, golden, polished, gleaming in the desert sun. Not a beast of burden, but a symbol. Fertility, strength, life. This is the God they now dance around. Aaron, the high priest, the brother of Moses, yields to the people's demand. He builds an altar before the calf, declares a feast day, and suddenly the camp that once waited in reverent silence is filled with sound, dancing, singing, the clang of tambourines, a celebration not of freedom, but of fear masked as devotion. Break time equals 2 south, greater than. High above on Sinai, Moses still speaks with God. He holds the tablets in his hands, etched not by man, but by the very finger of the divine. Words meant to guide, to covenant, to call. But before he can bring them down, he hears something, not prayer, not battle, but revelry. God speaks first. Go down, your people have turned aside. Break time equals 2 south, greater than Moses descends. Each step down the mountain is heavy, not with fear, but with knowing. The closer he gets, the louder the noise becomes. Not joy, but distortion. And then he sees it, the calf, the people, the chaos. He sees what they've made. And in that moment, he throws down the tablets. Stone shatters, echoes race across the plain. And the covenant symbolically is broken before it's even delivered. Break time equals 2 south, greater than he burns the calf, crushes it to powder, scatters it on water, makes the people drink it. Why? To show them what they've done, to turn a symbol of idolatry into bitter consequence. He confronts Aaron, asks, "What did these people do to you that you brought such sin upon them?" Aaron deflects, blames the fire, blames the people, but the truth remains. They could not wait, so they made. They could not see, so they shaped. Break time equals 2 south, greater than that day ends not in celebration, but in grief. Judgment falls, the camp is sobered. And Moses, he climbs the mountain again, not to receive, but to plead. He begs God for mercy. He stands between the people and their destruction, and in doing so, Moses becomes something new, not just a leader, but an intercessor, a man who knows the weight of shattered stone and still chooses to climb again. Mystery, where did the calf come from? Geodese of Egypt, echoes of idolatry, so much gold, so much certainty. Why a calf? Why this shape, this image? The people of Israel had just left Egypt, a land steeped in symbolism, statues, and sacred beasts. In Egyptian religion, the bull was not merely an animal, it was sacred, divine, a symbol of virility, protection, and the life force of gods. Apis, the sacred bull of Memphis, was believed to carry the soul of Pta, a creator deity, strong, earthbound, present, not distant like thunderclouds, but close visible. When the Israelites shaped a golden calf, they weren't simply inventing something new. They were reaching back to what they knew, to the visual comfort of statues, to the echo of empire, to the familiar gods of their past captivity. Break time equals to south, but the mystery deepens. Because it wasn't just idolatry, it was misplaced longing. The people didn't say, let's worship a new god. They said, this is the God who brought us out of Egypt. They confused the act of God with the work of their hands. They wanted a visible symbol of an invisible deliverer, something tangible, something now. And that desire, however human, led them into shadow. Break time equals to south. There's mystery, too, in the reaction. Why did Aaron go along with it? Was it fear, people-pleasing, weakness? He collected the gold. He built the altar. He declared the feast. And later, he denied responsibility. It's a mystery of leadership. How someone chosen to be holy can still fail to be brave. How the weight of expectation can bend even the faithful. Break time equals to south greater than and the calf itself. It becomes more than an idol. It becomes a warning. Throughout scripture, the sin of the golden calf is remembered. A wound that reopens in later generations, a turning point. Even centuries later, when King Jeroboam fears losing the loyalty of his people, he builds 2 golden calves and tells the people again, these are your gods who brought you out of Egypt. The same story told again, the same mistake reshaped, because people forget, and when they forget, they fill the silence with gold. Break time equals to south, greater than, but in the silence, God had not left. He had simply called Moses up higher. The people feared absence, but heaven was working. And the mystery remains. What do we shape when we feel unseen? What gods do we build when we fear delay? And how often do we drink the gold we've melted? And what of the leadership below? Aaron, dressed in priestly garments, had no thunder in his voice, no strength in his stand. His priesthood was inherited. Moses' leadership was forged. One built an altar to please the people. The other shattered stone to confront their sin. It's a contrast we still see. The popular versus the prophetic, the pleasing versus the piercing. And above it all, God does not destroy them. He relents. Because of Moses, because of mercy. Break time equals to south, greater than this episode closes with a question. What do we worship when we feel God is far? Do we build altars to convenience? Do we shape gods in our own image? Or do we wait, even when the cloud doesn't move? Even when the voice is silent? Even when the gold calls to us with its shine? Sometimes true faith is the quiet decision to stay at the foot of the mountain and not dance. And what of the leadership below? Aaron, dressed in priestly garments, had no thunder in his voice, no strength in his stand. His priesthood was inherited. Moses' leadership was forged. One built an altar to please the people. The other shattered stone to confront their sin. It's a contrast we still see. The popular versus the prophetic, the pleasing versus the piercing. And above it all, God does not destroy them. He relents. Because of Moses, because of mercy. Break time equals 2 south greater than this episode closes with a question. What do we worship when we feel God is far? Do we build altars to convenience? Do we shape gods in our own image? Or do we wait, even when the cloud doesn't move? Even when the voice is silent? Even when the goal calls to us with its shine? Sometimes true faith is the quiet decision to stay at the foot of the mountain and not dance. And what of the leadership below? Aaron, dressed in priestly garments, had no thunder in his voice, no strength in his stand. His priesthood was inherited. Moses' leadership was forged. One built an altar to please the people, the other shattered stone to confront their sin. It's a contrast we still see. The popular versus the prophetic, the pleasing versus the piercing. And above it all, God does not destroy them. He relents. Because of Moses, because of mercy. Break time equals 2 south greater than this episode closes with a question. What do we worship when we feel God is far? Do we build altars to convenience? Do we shape gods in our own image? Or do we wait, even when the cloud doesn't move? Even when the voice is silent? Even when the goal calls to us with its shine? Sometimes true faith is the quiet decision to stay at the foot of the mountain and not dance. The fire has faded now. The golden calf, once shining in the desert sun, has turned to ash, to dust, to memory. But its story remains, not as a tale of punishment, but as a mirror. A mirror for all of us who have ever grown tired of waiting, who have ever felt abandoned or afraid or unseen. A mirror for the moments we reached for something visible, because the invisible felt too far away. But even then, even when we wandered, even when we melted down our trust into things we could hold, God waited, not with rage, but with mercy. He called Moses back up the mountain. He carved new tablets. He chose to begin again. And that is the quiet rhythm of this story. Not just rebellion, but restoration. Not just idolatry, but invitation. So tonight, as you rest, let the noise of the camp grow quiet. Let the glow of false gods fade. Let your heart climb slowly, upward, inward, homeward. You don't have to shape anything tonight. You don't have to prove or perform or dance. You are already seen, already known, and even in the silence, especially in the silence, you are not alone. Sleep now under a sky more ancient than gold. Sleep in the quiet mercy of a God who still speaks, not in fire, but in stillness. And may your dreams be filled with mountains and clouds, and the peace that comes from waiting well. Good night. Welcome. You've come to a quiet place. A place where names echo across time and mysteries are not solved, only softened by silence. Tonight we meet a figure wrapped in sacred obscurity, a name whispered through generations, mentioned in Genesis, echoed in Psalms, and reverently invoked in the New Testament. Melchizedek, priest of the Most High God, King of Salem, and somehow, without beginning or end, you will not find his childhood written. No lineage, no tribe, no tomb. And yet, his presence lingers, calm, powerful, undisturbed. Tonight, we will enter his world, but not with haste. We will walk slowly through ancient hills, taste the warmth of shared bread and wine, and linger in the stillness of a temple unseen. First, we will explore the ordinary rhythms of ancient Salem, the quiet city before Jerusalem wore its crown. Then we will watch his encounter with Abraham, a moment that glows like candlelight in the long corridors of Scripture. Afterward, we will pause in the mystery, asking what ancient traditions, scrolls, and seekers have said of this sacred stranger. And finally, we will contrast his gentle kingship with the rulers of the land, those crowned by conquest, not peace. Let yourself breathe deeper. Let the questions wait. Tonight is not for solving, but for sinking into the story. We begin in the early morning light of Salem, where a priest walks the stone paths, blessing bread and silence. Daily life in ancient Salem. Imagine yourself waking before dawn. The sky is pale violet, cool and quiet. Mist drifts gently over the low hills of Canaan. The scent of fig leaves and warm earth rises from the ground, and somewhere nearby, a ram bleats in the distance. You are in ancient Salem, a city whose name means peace. Not yet Jerusalem, not yet ruled by kings or priests from scroll-filled temples, but already sacred. Already watching, already waiting. The city is built of soft stone stacked into quiet homes. Vines climb the walls. Courtyards are swept clean with branches. And the rhythm of life moves without urgency. Farmers stir coals from the night before, grinding barley into flour and pouring oil from clay jars. Children gather bundles of kindling. Mothers hum songs older than memory. The people of Salem rise slowly. They are not warriors or merchants. They are caretakers of the land and the silence. The fields outside the city ripple with barley, wheat, and groves of olive trees. Shepherds pass through, their staffs tapping gently on stone, driving flocks through dew-covered paths. And in the center of this quiet world is a priest. His name is Melchizedek, but he walks with no entourage. No crown on his head, no scroll declaring his lineage. He rises early, like the others, but his path leads not to the fields, not to the wells or markets, but to a flat place outside the city walls, a quiet altar of uncut stone. Here, he lifts his hands in prayer, not with spectacle, not with incense clouds or temple choirs, but with stillness. He is both king and priest, but his kingdom is not loud, his temple is not built. His presence is felt. The people revere him, but he walks among them without need for recognition. He speaks rarely, but when he does, it is with clarity, like a spring bubbling up from dry ground. He offers bread to the hungry, wine to the weary, Blessings to those in need of peace, and still, no one knows where he came from. His story is not passed through family trees. There are no childhood tales, no aging face, no record of his death. Just a rhythm, a man who blesses, a priest who never claimed the title, but held it. In this early city of Salem, before kings and conquerors would rename it, there was peace. A peace tended quietly by Melchizedek, like a candle sheltered from the wind. And that peace, like his story, would linger. Biography, an encounter with Abraham. There is a moment so brief you could miss it. Just a few verses in Genesis. A passing scene on the road back from battle. But in that moment, a king meets a patriarch, a priest meets a prophet, and heaven itself seems to pause. Abraham, still called Abram then, had just returned from rescuing his nephew Lot. He was weary, dust covered, blood still drying on the edges of his garments. He had seen war. He had faced kings. He had claimed no treasure for himself. And as he walked through the valley of Shava, the king's valley, a figure approached. Not a warrior, not a rival, not a man seeking payment, but Melchizedek. He brought no sword, only bread and wine. And then he blessed Abram. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram, the man chosen by God, gave him 1/10 of everything. No demand was made, no ritual was required, just recognition. Recognition of something ancient, something holy. In that brief exchange, bread, wine, blessing, and offering, something deeper was revealed. Not just generosity, but priesthood, a lineage not bound to tribe or temple. Melchizedek appeared and then vanished from the pages of Genesis. No origin, no death, but his presence lingered. Later, David would sing of him in the Psalms, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." And still later, in the New Testament, he would appear again as a symbol of eternal priesthood, a shadow of Christ, a bridge between heaven and earth. Was he a man, an angel? A pre-incarnate echo of the divine? Scripture does not say. It only records the meeting, the blessing, the bread, and the wine. And that was enough to mark him as the priest with no beginning and no end. Mystery and ancient interpretations. To speak of Melchizedek is to step into a space outside of time. He appears without genealogy, without mother, without father, without recorded birth, without recorded death. He is simply there. The book of Hebrews, written centuries after Genesis, draws out this very mystery, calling him a priest forever and likening him to the Son of God. not because Melchizedek was divine necessarily, but because his story had no beginning or end on paper. The silence, the gaps, the absences became an invitation. And across generations, people stepped in. The Dead Sea Scrolls whisper of Melchizedek in language usually reserved for the divine. In one fragment, he is portrayed as a heavenly figure, leading angels in battle, declaring the year of God's favor, ushering in justice. To the common community, he may have been more than a man, a messianic being, an agent of God's final restoration. Others believed he was Shem, Noah's son, still alive, ancient, carrying sacred knowledge forward after the flood. Still others imagined him as an angel, a celestial priest who descended for a single purpose: to meet Abram, to bless him, and to vanish. The mystery deepens in his offerings: bread and wine, not the meat of sacrifice, not the blood of bulls or goats, but a quiet table. Symbols of hospitality, yes, but also of covenant, of communion. Much later, at a different table, in an upper room, bread and wine would return, not as gifts from a king, but as the body and blood of another priest, who also bore no earthly lineage to Levi, a priest of a different order, an eternal one. Melchizedek becomes a shadow, a type, a prophetic whisper, and in that shadow, there is room for wonder, room for silence, room for awe, because what is left unspoken often lingers longer. A name, a blessing, a road in the valley, and a mystery that invites you to listen, not for answers, but for meaning. Contrast priestly power versus temporal thrones in the ancient world. Power often came dressed in robes, but not always the same kind. There were robes of royalty stitched with gold, fragrant with imported oils, heavy with status. And there were robes of priesthood, simpler, cleaner, woven with ritual and restraint. Most rulers clung to thrones. Melchizedek carried a blessing. Most kings demanded loyalty through law, force, and spectacle. Melchizedek offered bread. He didn't ride into the valley with armies. He didn't claim Abram's land or wealth. He simply stood briefly, silently between heaven and earth, a priest and a king. In contrast, the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, mentioned just before and after Melchizedek in the Genesis account, represent a different type of rule. Their names linger with judgment, their cities with ash. Sodom's king approaches Abram with a deal, offering people in exchange for goods. Transactional, earthly. It is Melchizedek who offers something higher, a blessing without demand. Even the mighty priesthood of Levi, established later through Aaron, pales in comparison to the mystery of Melchizedek. That priesthood was bound by lineage, law, and temple sacrifice. But Melchizedek's was free from all of that. A priesthood that needed no genealogy, no curtain, no altar drenched in blood. Just bread and wine and a word of blessing. Centuries later, as Jerusalem's temple bustled with politics and ritual, another figure would challenge it all. A man who overturned tables, who wept over the city, who, like Melchizedek, had no earthly claim to the priesthood, and yet became the high priest of a new covenant. Jesus of Nazareth. The book of Hebrews tells us plainly, he is not of the tribe of Levi, he is of the order of Melchizedek. Not a priest of law, but of promise, not of sacrifice, but of surrender, not of fear, but of mercy. And so Melchizedek stands at a great crossroads, between old and new, between throne and altar, between flesh and spirit. He reminds us that sacredness doesn't always wear a crown, and true authority doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it simply offers bread. So much of Melchizedek's story is silence. He walks in and walks out. No origin, no ending, no genealogy to trace. And yet he left something behind. A blessing, bread, wine, a shadow of things to come. In a world that often demands proof, pedigree, and performance, Melchizedek is a quiet defiance, a figure who says, sometimes the most sacred things cannot be explained. Sometimes the holiest moments are fleeting. Sometimes the presence of God appears not in power, but in mystery. As you settle into sleep tonight, let yourself rest in that mystery. Let the story of this silent priest walk beside you through valleys of questions, over hills of hope, and into the stillness where divine truths whisper without words. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to know where the story ends. You only need to rest. You are watched. You are held. You are blessed. Good night. Welcome. You've found your way back to this quiet space where time unravels slowly and sleep drifts in like a whisper from ancient skies. Tonight, we turn to a man of few words, a dreamer in the background of a world-changing story. His name was Joseph, not the one with the colorful coat, but the one who raised the child that would change history. Joseph of Nazareth, carpenter, guardian, dream listener. You may have passed over him in the pages of scripture. His words are never recorded. And yet, he received 4 divine dreams. He was not a prophet, but a protector. Not a preacher, but a presence. And tonight, we'll walk quietly through his world. First, we'll wander his daily life among wood shavings and morning light. Then we'll follow the timeline of his sacred dreams. After that, we'll step gently into mystery, divine messages in the night, angels at the edge of awareness. And finally, we'll contrast Joseph's quiet obedience with the noise of palaces and power. No need to hurry. Let your breath slow. Let the day fall away as we enter the quiet rhythm of Joseph's world. Daily life, carpenter's tools, and village simplicity in Nazareth. Imagine the early morning sun warming the dusty hills of Nazareth. The village is small, carved into the slopes. built of stone and timber, quiet in the mornings except for the soft rhythm of daily labor. You hear it now, the measured sound of a saw moving through cedar, the tap of a chisel against olive wood. The scent of pine resin and worn leather fills the air. This is the world of Joseph. He was a Tekton, a craftsman, not just a woodworker, but a builder. Someone who shaped homes and tools, doors and yokes, with steady hands and steady silence. His home was humble. Thick stone walls held in the cool of the evening. The floors were swept with palm fronds. His workspace open to the street. Neighbors passing by, offering greetings, bartering for repairs. He likely began his work before the village stirred. The morning light slanting in through open shutters, dust motes floating like tiny blessings. Wood was precious here. Nazareth was not a city of grandeur. Most homes were simple flat-roofed, shared spaces, sparse decoration. And yet every object Joseph touched held purpose. A plow handle, a child's stool, a roof beam. In the rhythm of his labor, there was worship. He kept the Sabbath. He followed the festivals. He walked to the synagogue. He said the prayers his father taught him, and perhaps someday passed them on to a child of his own. Meals were modest: flatbread, olives, lentils, and dates. Water carried from a village spring. Evenings spent by lamp glow, speaking little, resting much. There was no wealth in Joseph's household, but there was order, there was faith. Nazareth was overlooked by many, a dusty hill town, far from Jerusalem, far from temples and scrolls, far from courts and crowns, and yet it was here, in the ordinary quiet, that a world-changing life began. Joseph would have known the weight of expectation, betrothed to Mary, preparing a home, anticipating a future of simplicity and small joys. But life, as it often does, would shift beneath him, and dreams, soft and sacred, would begin to speak. Biography: Joseph's dreams, obedience, and the journey to Egypt. Joseph's life, though quiet, was marked by sacred interruption. It began with confusion. Mary, his betrothed, was with child. Not by him, not by any man. And in the laws of his time, this was no small matter. He could have exposed her. He could have walked away, but Joseph was described as righteous, not just lawful, but kind. So he resolved to release her quietly. No shame, no spectacle. And then the first dream. In the hush of sleep, an angel appeared. Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child within her is from the Holy Spirit. It would have been easier to doubt, to dismiss it as a trick of the night, a restless imagining, but Joseph didn't speak. He acted. He took Mary as his wife. He embraced the mystery, and in doing so, he became the first guardian of the incarnation. Time passed. A census was called. He and Mary journeyed to Bethlehem, perhaps with a borrowed donkey, perhaps walking the whole way. The town was crowded. No room in the inn. And so, in a space meant for animals, Mary gave birth. Joseph stood nearby, not delivering speeches, not calling attention to himself, just being there, present, silent, faithful. The baby Jesus was wrapped in cloth, laid in a manger, and Joseph, a carpenter, stood at the edge of the divine, but his dreams were not done. The second dream came as a warning. Rise, the angel said. Take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. Remain there, for Herod seeks to destroy the child." In the stillness of night, Joseph woke, gathered what he could, took Mary, took Jesus, and left. They crossed borders, stepped into the unknown. Sleep is often where the veil grows thin, where heaven speaks in symbols, and guidance arrives not through thunder, but in the hush of night. For Joseph, sleep was sacred, not just rest, not just routine, but revelation. Each of his dreams came with clarity, not confusion. There were no riddles, no vague metaphors, only action, instruction, direction. Take her, go, stay, leave. Dreams shaped his destiny, and in responding, Joseph shaped history. The mystery deepens when we consider the nature of these dreams. Angels appeared to prophets and kings, to warriors and priestesses, but Joseph was none of these. He was a man of wood and dust, a village builder, a stepfather, a man with calloused hands and quiet eyes. And yet he received not one, but 4 divine dreams. Why? Perhaps because he could be trusted to act without question, without delay. Dreams are sacred not because they are strange, but because they stir action in the waking world. Joseph's obedience didn't come from title, but from trust. Then there is the mystery of his role. Joseph was not Jesus's biological father, but he became a father in every meaningful way. He protected, he provided, he taught. Imagine him showing the young boy how to hold a chisel, how to measure a beam, how to speak kindly to a neighbor. Imagine their silence shared, not strained. A holy child growing under the guidance of a holy man, not a perfect man, not an exalted man, just good. There's sacredness in that. And the man who says little but listens well, and the one who receives dreams and becomes a protector of destinies. There is also mystery in his disappearance. At some point, Joseph is no longer mentioned. By the time Jesus begins his ministry, Joseph is gone. No final dream, no farewell speech, just absence. Some believe he passed away quietly, his work completed. Others see symbolism in that silence. Perhaps it mirrors his life, present in the most important moments, then stepping back to let the light emerge. Even his ending is a mystery, gentle, quiet, unfinished. Like a dream you try to remember when you wake, not for its words, but for how it made you feel. So now, as the night deepens and your breath softens, let Joseph fade gently in your mind, not as a forgotten figure in the background, but as a reminder of quiet strength. A man who never raised a sword but protected the Savior. A man who never spoke aloud in scripture but lived the word. He listened and acted. He dreamed and obeyed. And through that obedience, a child was kept safe. A prophecy fulfilled. A world changed, not by noise, not by power, but by trust. We often wait for burning bush, for parted seas, for voices thundering from clouds, but sometimes the holiest callings come in a whisper, in a dream, in a thought you can't shake, in a peace that settles when it shouldn't. Joseph reminds us, you don't need to be loud to be chosen. You don't need a title to carry the divine. Sometimes the most sacred work happens in the quiet, in the unnoticed, in the steady rhythm of an ordinary man guarding an extraordinary promise. So now, let that truth cradle you. You are not forgotten. You are not small, like Joseph. You are trusted with light, and even in your sleep, heaven still speaks. Rest now in the silence, in the steady warmth of presence. Let dreams find you gently, and may peace rest upon your spirit like morning dew upon cedar wood. You are safe, you are loved, you are held, and the world is quieter for it. Welcome. You've entered a sacred stillness, the kind that only comes after everything has fallen silent. Tonight's journey will be a slow walk through dust and dignity, through grief and grace. Guided by the story of a man named Job. His name may stir memories of suffering, of patience, of questions shouted into a heaven that didn't answer. But tonight, we're not here for answers. We're here to rest in the mystery, to let the ash settle, to listen to whispers in the wind, to feel the weight and quiet of what it means to be human. We'll begin with the rhythms of his daily life, the world he once knew, steady and full. Then we'll witness the unraveling his story of loss, his trial of silence. After that, we'll wander the strange edges of the tale where heaven and earth meet, and questions hang in the air like incense. And finally, we'll look from above, comparing Job's ashes to the altars of kings. Breathe in, breathe out. Let the story carry you. You don't have to make sense of it. You only need to be here. Daily life in the land of Uzi before the winds howled. Before the messengers came, Job lived in the land of Uz. It is a place you will not find on modern maps. Distant, old, perhaps mythical. But in the world of the Bible, it was real enough. A quiet region east of the Jordan, touched by desert breezes and caravan trails. Job's life was whole. Not perfect, not flashy, but full. He was a man of the earth, of herds and harvests, of olive groves and flocks. He walked fields dusted in morning light, ran his fingers through ripening grain, and listened to the low hum of animals settling for the night. His household was large, 7 sons, 3 daughters, servants, oxen, camels, and sheep, so many that his name was known across the region. And still, Job was quiet, known not for his wealth, but for his wisdom, not for his authority, but for his reverence. Each day, his rhythms were rooted in gratitude. He rose early to offer sacrifices, not out of fear, but out of love. He watched the stars fade over his land and whispered blessings into the wind. His children would gather, feasting and celebrating, living fully. And Job, watching from a distance, would offer prayers just in case their hearts had drifted from the sacred. This was not anxiety, but attentiveness. He was a man attuned to the divine, not just in temples, but in the soil, in the sky, in the subtle silences between animal calls. Imagine yourself there, a guest in his home. You wake to the sound of goats being led out to pasture, the distant ringing of clay bells, the warm scent of barley stew. The stone walls of the house are cool in the morning. A servant pours water over your hands. The breeze carries the faint sound of singing. Job walks the perimeter of his land slowly, not with pride, but with purpose. Each step a prayer, each moment a kind of offering. This was a man whose life pulsed with quiet order. Each day folded gently into the next until it didn't, until everything he knew was taken. But before the storms came, before the boils and the ashes, Job's world was one of quiet abundance, and perhaps that's what made the silence that followed so deafening. Biography, the trial, the silence, and the voice from the whirlwind, the stillness broke like a branch beneath sudden weight. It began, as these things often do, with messengers. One by one, they came, dust on their cloaks, eyes wide with horror, bearing words that turned the world upside down. The oxen taken, the sheep burned, the servants slain, the camels raided, and finally, worst of all, his children gone in an instant. A house collapsed, and with it, a father's heart. Break time equals 2 south. Greater than Job did not cry out in anger. He did not curse the heavens or run into the wilderness. He tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell to the ground. Not in rage, in reverence. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away, he whispered. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Break time equals 2 south, greater than. But the testing was not over. Next came the body, boils, open, aching, relentless. Job sat in the ashes, scraping at his skin with broken pottery, not to end the pain, but to understand it. His wife, trembling with her own grief, urged him, curse God and die. But Job would not. He was not angry. Not yet. He was bewildered, stunned by the quiet, the silence of heaven. Break time equals 2 south, greater than then came the friends. Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, they came to comfort and stayed to accuse. They sat with him in silence for 7 days, and then they spoke. Surely, they said, you must have sinned. Again and again, they tried to make sense of the suffering, tried to defend the system, tried to protect their version of God. But Job knew the truth. He had done nothing to deserve this. And so he did what few dared. He questioned, why was I born? Why do the wicked prosper? Why is God silent? His prayers turned raw, his lamentations long. He asked not for restoration, but for revelation. Break time equals 2 south, greater than, and then finally the whirlwind. Out of the storm, a voice, not soft, not angry, but vast. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? It was not an answer. It was a question, one that echoed through the bones. The divine voice did not explain suffering. It revealed mystery. It unfolded creation, stars, storms, sea creatures, the paths of lightning and the womb of the dawn. It reminded Job that he was small, yes, but not forgotten. Break time equals 2 south, and Job replied, I had heard of you with my ears, but now my eyes have seen you. In the end, he was restored. His fortune doubled, his family renewed, but that is not the point. The point is the journey, the silence, the ashes, the whisper that rose from the whirlwind. Mystery, the cosmic bet, divine courtrooms, and the unseen lessons imagined now, not a field, not a desert, but a realm beyond sight. A court vast and bright, where stars are witnesses and winds carry secrets. It begins with a meeting. The sons of God gathered, celestial beings who move at the speed of thought. Among them came the accuser. The Hebrew calls him Hasatan, not a name, but a title. The adversary, the challenger. He did not sneer. He did not lie. He asked a question. Does Job fear God for nothing? Break time equals 2 south, greater than. It was not an attack on Job's character. It was a challenge to the very structure of faith. If blessings bring worship, what happens when blessings are taken away? Would Job still love God in ruin? And so permission was given. Not a punishment, a test. But this test was wrapped in silence. Job never knew. He was never told of the wager, the courtroom, the cosmic curiosity. To him, it was simply collapse, loss, pain, loneliness. This is the great mystery of Job's story. Not only what is said, but what is hidden. Scholars have long debated its meaning. Was Job historical or poetic? Is the voice from the whirlwind an answer or an enigma? In ancient midrash, rabbis described Job as a non-Israelite sage, a man of wisdom outside the covenant, yet still beloved by the eternal. Some say Job's story parallels that of Israel, blessed, broken, exiled, and eventually restored. Others see it as a protest, a divine permission slip to question God without shame. Even the ending raises questions. His wealth returns. New children are born. Peace is granted. But do new sons replace the ones lost? Does restoration erase the ache? The mystery remains. Job's wounds may have closed, but the scars, they stayed. And perhaps that too is sacred. In the margins of ancient manuscripts, scribes drew silent symbols beside this story, hands uplifted, eyes closed. Not to explain, but to witness, and so we too. Witness the divine court, the silent test, the mystery of undeserved pain. We cannot solve it, but we can sit beside it and let it breathe. Job's ashes vs. the thrones of men. Now let us turn from the ashes to the halls of power. In Job's day, kings sat on carved thrones. They ruled from high places, surrounded by polished stone and perfumed halls. Scribes recorded their edicts, soldiers guarded their sleep, and silver goblets shimmered at their tables. But Job sat in dust. His throne was a pile of broken pottery. His robes were torn. His crown, if he ever wore one, was replaced by silence. This is the contrast. In the ancient world, power meant proximity to temples, to kings, to wealth. But Job, in his suffering, was far from all three. He had no court, no priest to defend him, no riches to ransom his peace. And yet, the voice of the Almighty chose to speak to him, not to a monarch, not to a prophet, but to a man in ashes. This contrast is no accident. It reflects a deeper truth, that divine presence is not reserved for palaces. That revelation often comes to those the world has forgotten. Job's friends believed in the equations. Righteousness equals reward. Wickedness equals ruin. But Job's very life refuted that. He was righteous, and still he suffered. And when he questioned it, he wasn't condemned. He was answered. Not with comfort, but with presence. Not with justice, but with awe. We contrast him too with ancient emperors, those who built towers of pride, demanded offerings, and silenced dissent with the stroke of a blade. They ruled with fear, Job ruled with reverence. His legacy was not in monuments, but in a whispered line, spoken from the center of the storm. Now my eyes have seen you. He did not conquer lands. He did not command armies. But he won something deeper, an audience with the unseen, a glimpse of the infinite. And that is the great reversal. Stillness after the storm, and now the fire has cooled. The storm has passed. The ash settles into quiet patterns upon the ground. You've walked with Job, through wealth, through ruin, through silence, and through the whirlwind. You've watched him lose, question, listen, and live again. But more than his story, you've touched something deeper, the ache of not knowing, the strange peace of surrender. Job's tale is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a mirror for those who stood awake at night, asking why. A mirror for the ones who love God, but do not always understand him. Break time equals 2 south. And so if tonight you carry questions, if you sit in your own quiet places, wondering if heaven hears, let Job's journey remind you. Sometimes the silence is the answer. Sometimes the ashes become sacred. And even when no one else understands, God speaks not in fire, but from the depths of your being. He sees. He knows. He remains. Break time equals 2 south. So let your breath slow. Let your body soften. And let your heart remember what Job discovered. That even in sorrow, even in silence, you are never alone. Break time equals 3 south, greater than sleep now, with the comfort of ancient faith wrapped around you. The story may fade, but the presence remains. Until next time, rest in peace. And may your night be gentle. Welcome, you've returned to a place of softness and silence, where the ancient desert winds whisper beneath starlit skies, and the stories of those once forgotten rise gently into view. Tonight, we enter the wilderness, but not alone. Tonight, we follow a woman who was cast out, yet never abandoned. A woman whose name means flight, but whose eyes were open to see the divine. Her name is Hagar. She was not a queen, not a prophet, not a priestess. She was a maidservant, a foreigner in a foreign land. And yet she was the first person in Scripture to name God, and the first to be addressed by an angel. We begin not with drama or despair, but with her daily life, a rhythm of service, a pattern of quiet endurance. Let your breath slow, let your body rest, and let Hagar's story unfold. Like desert winds across the sand, break time equals 2 south, greater than segment 1, daily life in Abraham's household. Imagine waking each morning to the low sounds of livestock shifting in their pens, to the muted thud of footsteps on sand, and the crackle of embers being stirred back to life. You are in the tents of Abram, a patriarch, a nomad, a man with many flocks and many servants. Hagar was one of them. She was not born among them. Most likely, she came from Egypt, given as part of the wealth Abram received during his time there. We do not know her family. We do not know if she wept when she was taken, but we do know this: she adapted. Each day, Hagar would have carried water from the well, her steps steady, practiced, the clay jug balanced on her shoulder. She would have ground grain by hand, kneeling beside the other women, hands dusty, arms strong. The tents were made of goat hair, woven tightly to keep out the desert wind. Inside, life was quiet but never still. Cooking fires were lit early, flatbread pressed and flipped. Lentils simmered with onions and herbs. The work was shared, but the hierarchy was clearer. At the center stood Sarai, Abram's wife, and beside her, quiet and watchful, stood Hagar. She did not speak unless spoken to. She moved when told. She served in silence, and yet she saw everything. She saw the longing in Sarai's face as the years passed without a child. She saw the prayers, the frustration, the searching of the stars. And she likely heard the murmurs of promises given to Abram of a God who spoke of descendants as numerous as the sand. But none of that belonged to Hagar. She was present, but never invited. Still she endured. Her hands shaped the bread. Her arms hauled the water. Her eyes remained lowered until the day came when everything changed. But that is a story for later. For now, she is simply a woman in a tented camp, moving through repetition, finding meaning in small tasks. And though no one noticed her, God did. Hagar's exile, the angel, and the well, the silence of the camp was different now, not the hush of sleep or mourning, but a silence laced with tension. Hagar's world had shifted, not by her choosing. When Sarah gave her to Abram, it was not affection. It was function, a surrogate womb, a vessel for what Sarai had not yet received. And when Hagar conceived, a new weight settled between them. What began in obedience became offense. Sarai's pain grew sharper. Hagar's presence became unbearable, a reminder, a mirror. The scriptures say that Hagar despised her mistress, but perhaps it was simply the quiet rebellion of self-awareness. The moment a servant realizes she too carries life, it was enough to cause a fracture. Sarai dealt harshly with her, and Hagar fled. Break time equals 2 south, greater than. Now imagine her feet pounding the desert sand, pregnant, alone, wains lifting her hair, staining her face. She did not head for a new home. She returned to what she knew, Egypt, but she would not make it there. Near Shur, she collapsed beside a spring, a quiet pool of water tucked in the wilderness, and there, something divine occurred. The angel of the Lord found her. Not Abram, not Sarai, not the elders, the kings, the priests, her, a servant, a runaway, a woman, Hagar, servant of Sarai. The voice said, "Where have you come from, and where are you going?" A question not just of geography, but of identity, of belonging. She answered simply, "I am fleeing from my mistress." And the angel, gentle but firm, spoke a truth that was hard and holy. Return, submit. You will bear a son, and you shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your affliction. Break time equals 3 south, greater than the word settled in her like a slow rain. You are seen, you are heard. She, who had moved in the background, now stood face to face with the divine. And in that moment, she did something extraordinary. She gave God a name. El Roi, she said, the God who sees me. In a world where women were rarely named, she named the divine. The spring became known as Bir Lahai Aroi, the well of the living one who sees me. And there, in that still place, Hagar's story shifted. She was no longer just a maid. She was a witness, a mother, a mystic marked by encounter. She rose from the well, not yet free, but forever changed. And as she walked back toward the camp, toward Sarai, toward tension and toil, she carried within her a quiet knowing that even in exile, she was not forgotten. The God who sees angelic messengers, Ishmael's destiny, there is something sacred about being seen, not noticed, not watched, but truly seen, recognized, known. Hagar gave voice to that mystery. El Aro, she whispered, the God who sees me. It was not just a poetic phrase, it was a revelation. She had not sought a vision. She had not climbed a mountain or prepared a sacrifice. And yet, an angel appeared. This divine visitation was quiet, not fire, not thunder, but a conversation at a spring. Throughout Scripture, angelic messengers appear in many ways, some with blazing swords, some in blinding brilliance, but to Hagar, the angel came gently. It was the first time in the Hebrew Scriptures that an angel speaks directly to a woman, and not just any woman. A pregnant Egyptian servant, a refugee, a runaway, and that moment changed history. Break time equals 3 south, greater than the angel spoke of her child. His name Ishmael means God hears. A mirror of her own experience. You shall have a son, the angel said, and he shall be a wild donkey of a man, not an insult, but an image of untamed freedom. He would live free, his hand against others, and others against him, but never bound. This prophecy has puzzled many, but for Hagar, it meant survival, legacy, a future. She was no longer nameless, no longer voiceless. Her story had meaning. And her well Berlehi Aroi became a sacred marker of divine intimacy. It would appear again later in Scripture as a dwelling place of Isaac. The other son. The mystery deepens when we consider this. Hagar encountered the divine alone. No interpreter, no priest. Just her and a presence that spoke directly. This is a theme throughout mystical texts, divine revelation, given to the least expected, in the wilderness, in exile, by a spring. Her son Ishmael would grow to be a great nation. Many traditions trace his lineage to the Arab people, and through him, an entire legacy unfolds, but it all began with a moment under a tree, beside a spring, and a God who saw her. That is the heart of this mystery. Not just that Hagar survived, but that she was seen, and in being seen, she saw. In a world of veils and hierarchies, Hagar broke through. She left no long speeches, no psalms, no palace, just a well, a name, and a promise. Sarah's status, Hagar's marginalization, and motherhood and shadow. Contrast often reveals what clarity alone cannot. To truly understand Hagar, we must glimpse her life through the lens of comparison. Side by side, Sarah and Hagar, one a matriarch, the other a maid. Sarah, once Sarai, was the wife of Abraham, privileged by position, yet pained by barrenness. She moved in tense of authority. Her name carried weight, her words set events into motion. And Hagar existed in her shadow, a silhouette behind the veil. Though younger, though strong, she was never the one with the voice. Her body became an answer to someone else's longing. Her womb, a vessel for another's legacy. Imagine the quiet ache of that dynamic. Sarah, watching Hagar's belly swell with the life she herself had not conceived. Hagar, watching Sarah's gaze grow colder, the tension thick as morning dust. And yet, neither woman was whole. Sarah had status, but not the promise, not yet. Hagar had the child, but no protection, Nase. They were bound by gender, divided by power. Break time equals 3 south, greater than motherhood 2, revealed the rift. Sarah would eventually birth Isaac, the son of the covenant, the child of laughter, but Hagar's son Ishmael came first. In a world where lineage shapes destiny, this created tension not easily resolved. Sarah, though older, would claim her role as matriarch, and Hagar would be cast out again, this time with her son, wandering into the wilderness once more, carrying not just water, but despair. When their provisions ran out, Hagar placed Ishmael beneath a shrub and walked a distance away, not wishing to watch him die. And yet, once again, an angel came. God heard the cry of the boy and called to Hagar from heaven, "Lift the boy, hold him fast, for I will make him a great nation." And there her eyes were opened. She saw a well. She rose. She gave the boy water. Break time equals 3 south, greater than. This contrast is quiet, but profound. Sarah, the woman of promise, waited decades for joy. Hagar, the woman of exile, met God in her suffering. Both were seen, both were heard. But only Hagar named the divine, and perhaps that is the thread that binds their stories. Not competition, not hierarchy, but encounter. In the shadows of Sarah's tent, Hagar found strength. In the margins of the story, she carved her name. And in the face of despair, she received a future. So now, as the night deepens around you, and the story settles into silence, you may find yourself still thinking of her, Hagar, the woman beneath the tree, not a queen, not a prophet, not even a name held high in the scrolls of power, but she was seen. And she saw, in the cool hush of the wilderness and the rustle of desert leaves and the stillness of abandonment, a whisper of the divine reached her, and that whisper became a well, a place of survival, a place of memory. The God who sees saw her, and if he could see her, a runaway, a servant, a woman in the margins, then perhaps he sees you too. Wherever you are, restless or weary, hidden or hopeful, you are not unseen. Let the story of Hagar remind you there is sacredness in survival. There is divinity in desert moments. And even when no one else knows your name, heaven might be whispering it. Sleep now beneath your own tree of rest. May angels find you there, and may your dreams carry you to wells of wonder. Good night. Welcome, emphasis. You've come to a space between silence and mystery, a place older than memory, where names are written in shadows and stories are whispered in stars. Tonight, we travel far beyond the flood, before the law, before the prophets, to a world both ancient and unfamiliar, the world of Enoch. He was a man of no war, no miracles, no throne, and yet he never died. Scripture says he walked with God, and then he was no more. No chariot of fire, no grave, only the breath of God, and a vanishing. Tonight, you will walk with him. You'll step quietly into the world before the flood, the world of watchers, wonders, and whispers. You'll feel the rhythm of his days. You'll hear the slow unfolding of divine presence, and you'll glimpse grasps the mystery of what it means to walk so closely with heaven that the line between worlds disappears. Let yourself sink into the ancient stillness. Let the story unfold like smoke, and let Enoch walk beside you. Imagine a time before time felt measured, before kings, before cities, when the earth was young, and the sky still heavy with memory. The sun rises gently through thick morning mist. The trees are taller, the air is thick with moisture and birdsong. You are standing in the world of Enoch. It is a quiet world, but not empty. The soil is rich. The rivers run wide and slow. People live closer to the land. They rise with the sun and sleep beneath skies crowded with stars. Break time equals 2 south, greater than Enoch's home is simple. Stone pressed into earth, wood bound with vine. His hands are calloused, shaped by work and prayer. He is not a priest, not a king. He is a scribe, a seer, a walker. He tends animals in the morning, goats and birds. He gathers figs, draws water from ancient wells, and speaks little. His family respects his silence. They sense the nearness he carries, like a man who listens, even when no one is speaking. Break time equals 2 south, greater than Enoch writes in clay and on bark. Symbols passed down, visions recorded in lines and circles. He speaks of things the elders don't fully understand, of watchers, of hidden realms, of angels fallen and angels weeping. But he does not preach. He walks, each day into the hills, past the rivers, through the groves. Sometimes he's gone for hours, sometimes for days, and when he returns, his eyes hold something distant, like he's seen too much light. To speak plainly, biography, visions, wisdom, and disappearance. The days passed gently, seasons turned, though the people barely noticed. For the world was lush, and time flowed like honey, slow, golden, and unmeasured. But Enoch kept watch. He was not content to merely live. He longed to understand. And so he listened, not just to the wind or to the elders, but to the still voice that stirred beneath the silence. Break time equals 2 south, greater than 1 night. As the moon hung low and red, Enoch dreamed. He saw tall beings clothed in radiant robes, with faces too bright for language. They whispered truths he could not repeat. He saw the heavens unfold like scrolls, the stars moving with intention, the earth suspended in divine rhythm. He saw the watchers, angels who had descended to earth, not to protect, but to possess. He saw their error, their longing, their fall, and he saw the children born from them, giants, powerful, lost. In his vision, Enoch was not afraid. He did not run. He did not hide. He asked questions. He wrote what he was shown, not for glory, not for followers, but because he knew wisdom unrecorded can vanish like mist. So he carved his visions into clay, etched his revelations onto bark and bone, and he passed them down, quietly, to his sons, to his daughters, to anyone willing to sit in silence long enough to hear. Break time equals 3 south, greater than the scriptures say. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. One morning, he walked into the hills as he always did, but he did not return. Some say he vanished in light, others say he faded with the mist, but all agree he was taken not in fear, but in favor. Break time equals 2 south, greater than he had walked so closely with the divine, so faithfully, so reverently, that heaven no longer waited. It opened, and he stepped in, like a man stepping from shadow into sunlight, from breath into spirit. His body, his bones, his thoughts, no longer bound by dust, just presence. Break time equals 2 south, greater than, and though his name appears only briefly in scripture, his silence echoes loud. He was not known for miracles, not for wars, not for ruling. Only this: he walked with God, and somehow, in a world growing louder, more corrupt, more divided, that was enough. Break time equals 3 south, greater than. Enoch's life teaches us that not all holiness is public, that not all revelation is shouted, but sometimes the most divine thing you can do is walk with intention and listen with your whole self, and one day, without fear, without fanfare, step through the veil. It is said he was shown the full history of the world from beginning to end, not just what was, but what will be. And when his writings were complete, he vanished, taken, body and spirit, into the higher places, not lost, but preserved. Break time equals 3 south, greater than the early church knew of this book. It was read, quoted, even referenced by the Apostle Jude, but over time it faded, omitted, forgotten by some, yet it remained in Ethiopian monasteries, in fragments beneath desert sands, and now it speaks again. Break time equals 2 south, greater than. But Enoch's mystery is not just in angels or visions. It's in his posture. He did not chase power. He did not fear the unknown. He walked steadily, quietly into revelation. He listened until heaven opened. And he reminds us that sacred things do not always wear crowns. Sometimes they wear humility, stillness, silence. Break time equals 3 south. So tonight, let your thoughts drift with the ancient wind. Let the hidden words of old scrolls rest gently in your mind. Not to stir fear, but wonder. Not to solve, but to sense. You are not far from mystery. It lives in the breath, in the pause, in the walk, just as it did with Enoch. The contrast between Enoch and his generation was not in what they knew, but in what they trusted. The world trusted power. Enoch trusted presence. They trusted what they could forge. He trusted what he could follow. They demanded signs. He received silence and honored it. Break time equals 3 south, greater than. And as the earth tilted further into corruption, he tilted deeper into grace. He did not run. He did not rage. He walked, and that was enough. So rare was his quiet righteousness, so deep his reverence that God did not let him taste death. He was not lost in the flood that would come. He was lifted before the waters ever rose. Break time equals 2 south, greater than. His story is not one of escape, but alignment. He did not flee judgment. He lived forgot him. Though his scrolls were sealed, his path remained. A path not paved with stone, but presence. A life not measured in victories, but in footsteps taken toward the divine. Break time equals 3 south, greater than so now. As the world around you slows and the shadows lengthen, feel that same walk unfold within you. Not toward noise, not toward fear, but toward a presence that does not change. Let Enoch's quiet strength anchor your own. Let his stillness soften your breath, and let the truth settle in your spirit. In a world chasing more, you are allowed to walk less, to be still, to be slow, to be with God. The walk that never ended, and now you've walked beside a man who left no battle scars, but changed history through silence. You've stepped into a world before the flood, before noise, before law, before men tried to become gods. You've sat beside clay tablets etched with dreams. You've watched a figure disappear into light, not with fear, but with favor. Enoch, the one who was taken, the one who walked with God. Break time equals 2 south, greater than no grand speeches, no currencies, just footsteps and faith. He lived in a world growing loud with corruption, and yet he listened, not to kings, not to angels, but to the still, holy rhythm beneath it all. He did not rush. He did not run. He walked, and when the time came, he simply kept walking, from dust to divine, from breath to beyond. Break time equals 2 south, greater than, and perhaps that is the invitation for you tonight. Not to conquer, not to control, but to walk, to slow your breath, to soften your heart, to take one step closer to presence. And maybe, just maybe, that presence is already with you, right here, in the stillness, in the quiet between thoughts. Break time equals 2 south, greater than let your body rest. Let the heaviness of sleep settle like warm linen. You do not need to prove. You do not need to perform. You only need to be. You are already walking the sacred path when you choose peace over panic, stillness over striving, love over noise. Break time equals 2 south, greater than sleep now, beloved one. Walk with the one who has always been walking with you. Let the dreams come. Let the mystery hold you. And know you are not alone. You are not lost. You are already seen, just as Enoch was. Good night. Welcome, and you've come to a place beyond the noise. A place where the winds whisper through stone canyons, where ancient prophets wandered alone with the sky, and where silence held more power than thunder. Tonight, we walk into the wilderness. We enter a land scorched by drought, soft only by the whisper of the divine. We follow a man who heard God not in the storm, but in the stillness. His name was Elijah, the fire caller, the cave dweller, the prophet of both thunder and quiet. But before the flames fell from heaven, before the chariot of light, Elijah lived a different life, a life of solitude, of wandering, of waiting. Tonight we will walk slowly through it. We will feel the dry wind on our skin. We will watch goats graze among thorns, and we will listen for the voice that comes not in noise, but in the still small breath. We'll begin with the rhythms of exile, his daily life on the run. Then we'll journey through his boldest moments, Mount Carmel and beyond. Next, we'll enter the realm of mystery fire from heaven, visions, and the chariot of light. And finally, we'll lift the veil on power, exploring the contrast between Elijah's silence and the noise of kings. Let yourself rest. Let the dust settle, and let us follow the path into the desert dreams of Elijah. Elijah the wanderer, Elijah the hidden one. Before the miracles, he learned how to disappear. He knew the taste of exile, the chill of caves, the hum of bees in the dry stillness. He learned to hear the world when it wasn't speaking. He learned to follow the wind and to trust the voice that would one day return. But not yet, not tonight. Tonight, he waits, just as you wait, for something deeper, for something unseen. And as you rest beside his fire, with the desert breeze across your face, know this: before the prophet stood before kings, he knelt in silence. Mount Carmel, the still small voice in ascension. The land had grown dry, not just in soil, but in soul. Rain had not fallen in years. The sky was closed. The people whispered in hunger. The ground cracked like tired skin. And the name on every tongue was Baal. They said he would bring the rain, that he held thunder in his hands, that his priests draped in crimson and ash could awaken the sky. But Elijah knew better. Break time equals 2 south, greater than he had waited in silence. Now he was ready to speak. He stood tall, cloaked in simplicity, no crown, no armor, only presence, and fire in his bones. He challenged the prophets of Baal to a contest, not of swords, but of flame. 2 altars, 2 offerings, 2 prayers, and a single question: if the Lord is God, follow him. The priests cried out. They shouted, danced, slashed their skin, blood mingling with dust. But nothing came. The sky stayed silent. Then Elijah stepped forward, quietly, simply. He rebuilt the altar, 12 stones for 12 tribes. He poured water over the wood, once, twice, 3 times, until the trench around it was full. And then he spoke. No shouting, no spectacle, just a prayer. Let it be known this day that you are God. And the fire fell, not gently, not slowly, but all at once. It consumed the sacrifice, the stones, the water, the dust. The people fell to their knees, not in fear, but in revelation. The drought was ending, but for Elijah, the storm was just beginning. Break time equals 2 south. Queen Jezebel had heard. She was not moved. She was enraged. She swore to end him. And Elijah, the fire caller, the prophet of flame, ran. He ran into the wilderness, alone. Again, he collapsed beneath a broom tree and whispered his weariness to the sky. It is enough. Let me die. But God did not answer with death. Instead, he sent an angel, soft bread, cool water, a touch on the shoulder. Arise and eat. And again, the journey is too much for you. Break time equals 2 south, greater than Elijah walked for 40 days. Through valleys, across ridges, until he found the cave. Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, he rested, and then he heard a question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he answered, poured out his heart, spoke his loneliness, his grief, his ache for justice, and God responded, but not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire. All those came loud, powerful, terrifying, but the Lord was not in them. And then came a still, small voice, a whisper, barely heard, deep as breath, close as heartbeat, and Elijah knew that this was God. There would be no armies, no thunder, only a whisper and a task. Elijah would anoint kings. He would appoint a successor. He would not walk alone forever. Years passed. And then, one day, as he walked with Elisha, something changed. A wind began to rise. The sky shimmered, and a chariot of fire appeared. Horses of flame, wheels that burned but did not consume. And Elijah was lifted upward into the heavens in a whirlwind, no tomb, no grave, just light and wind and memory. Break time equals 3 south, greater than the people said he would return. That one day, before the great day of the Lord, he would come again. And perhaps he still lingers just beyond the veil, in the silence, in the dreams of the faithful, in the breath between prayers. Elijah, the prophet who disappeared in fire and was shaped, mystery, fire from heaven, angelic visitations, in the chariot of light there are prophets, and then there are mysteries. And Elijah, he was both. His life, like the wilderness he wandered, was filled with signs and silences, with fire and whispers. He was a man caught between earth and something else, a thin place, a liminal edge, the boundary between heaven and dust. Break time equals 2 south, greater than. One of the first signs was not a word, but flame. Not a quiet teaching, but fire falling from the sky in answer to prayer. The people on Mount Carmel saw it, a bolt from beyond. Not lightning, not storm, something divine, controlled, sent, complete. It did not just consume wood, it swallowed water, stone, dust. It was as if the earth itself was pulled upward in one holy moment and made pure. No one could deny what they saw, but what they didn't see was what came after. Break time equals 2 south. Elijah lived with mystery, not just miracles, but encounters. In the wilderness, he was visited by ravens, creatures considered unclean, yet chosen by God to feed the prophet. Why ravens? Why not doves? Why not angels? Perhaps because even the untouchable can carry provision. Perhaps because nothing is outside God's reach. Break time equals 2 south, and yet angels came too. Soft steps in the night, hands that did not startle, bread warm from no fire, a voice that did not command, but offered. Eat, for the journey is too much for you. This is the God of Elijah, not always a God of thunder, not always a voice from the clouds, sometimes simply bread and silence. Break time equals 2 south, greater than, and yet the mystery deepened, because Elijah's end was not an end. There was no grave, no stone to mark his name. There was only the wind. The scripture says, a chariot of fire appeared, drawn by horses of flame, and Elijah was taken up in a whirlwind. It is written plainly, without exaggeration, without explanation. No ladder, no wings, just wind and flame and the heavens. Opening. Elisha saw it and tore his clothes, not in fear, but in grief and awe. For how do you grieve a man who never died? How do you tell others what you saw, what you felt? Some say Elijah was taken like Enoch before him. Some say he walks still, that he will return again before the day of the Lord. But whatever the truth, his departure was not just about escape. It was a sign, a message, that earth and heaven are not far apart, that what seems final may not be, that silence and flame can belong to the same God. Break time equals 3 south, even now. The spirit of Elijah is spoken of in dreams, in visions, in whispers among prophets and mystics. Some say he comes to those in need, not in form, but in presence, in the breath of wind that follows prayer, in the sudden certainty that you are not alone, in the fire that burns but does not consume. Break time equals 2 south, greater than this is the mystery. Elijah, the man of flame, who lived for silence, the man who ran from kings and was lifted to light, the man who fell under a tree asking for death and was taken without it. The chariot was not for glory, it was for completion. And even now, if you listen very softly, you may feel the echo of its wheels turning in the sky. Contrast King Ahab's court, Jezebel's influence and Baal worship. The palace was far from the wilderness. Its floors were smooth, its halls echoed with music and ambition, and its gods were many. This was not the world of prophets. This was the world of kings, and in its center sat Ahab, crowned in gold, wrapped in embroidered robes, served by 100 hands, fed with silver utensils and stories of conquest. But beneath the marble was wrought, not of stone, but of soul. Break time equals 2 south, greater than Ahab ruled Israel, but not alone. Beside him stood Jezebel, a queen not born of their land, but brought from Sidon. She did not speak the name of Yahweh. She spoke of Baal, of Asherah, of rain and fertility, and the power of carved wood and stone. And she did not whisper. She commanded. She had her own prophets, hundreds, fed at her table, honored in her courts, and she made it her mission to silence the others. The prophets of Yahweh were hunted, driven into caves, killed in secret, forgotten by the palace. Break time equals 2 south, greater than this. Was the world Elijah stood against, not just drought and hunger, but power without reverence, worship without truth, noise without wisdom. Ahab built altars, not to God, but to Baal. He let his people bow to storm gods while the skies remained dry. He traded faith for politics, conviction for control, and when Elijah spoke, it was not heard as prophecy, but as rebellion. Break time equals 2 south, greater than Elijah's world, was made of stone and silence. Ahab's world, of noise and wealth, Elijah walked barefoot in the dust. Ahab rode in chariots, surrounded by guards. Jezebel painted her face, sat on thrones, and plotted the deaths of men who dared speak differently. And yet, she feared one man, the one who could not be bought, who answered to no court, whose power came not from politics, but from prayer. Even in his fleeing, Elijah's presence lingered in the halls of power. His words had weight, his absence was unnerving, and when he returned, it was not with an army. It was with a message. You have abandoned the commands of the Lord and followed the Baals. He was not afraid, because Elijah knew something the palace had forgotten. The rain did not come from idols. The fire did not fall for bribes. And the voice that moved the mountains spoke in whispers, not shouts. Break time equals 3 south, greater than, and so as the world of Ahab and Jezebel grew heavy with pride, Elijah stood as contrast. A reminder that holiness is not loud, that truth does not need a throne, and that sometimes the one in the cave has more power than the one on the throne. Break time equals 3 south, greater than tonight. You have walked in the dust of both worlds. You felt the silence of the prophet and the clamor of kings. You've seen the fire fall from heaven and heard the stillness that followed. And now, as your breath softens and your mind settles, let the desert hold you, not the palace, not the crowd, but the quiet, where the voice still speaks. The prophet who listened, and now you've walked the dry paths, you've sat beside a low fire, listened for rain that never came, and followed a man who heard heaven not in thunder, but in stillness. Elijah, a name carved into mountains, a whisper carried on wind. He was never crowned, never rich, never praised by power, but he was heard by ravens, by widows, by angels, by God. Break time equals 2 south, greater than he ran, and rested. He burned and wept. He called down fire and curled beneath a tree. He was both flame and ash, boldness and breaking, lonely, but never truly alone. And maybe that's what makes his story so holy. It's not the chariot of fire that makes him unforgettable. It's the way he kept listening even when no one else did. Break time equals 2 south, greater than so tonight. As your body becomes heavy, as your breath slows like the desert wind, remember, there is power in stillness. There is presence in exile. There is divinity in silence. And sometimes the voice you long to hear is already speaking softly within. Break time equals 2 south, greater than. Let the wilderness wrap around you like a cloak. Let the stars become your ceiling. Let the prophet's path become your peace. You do not need fire tonight. You do not need answers. Only the still moment. Only the soft breath. Only the gentle truth that you are seen and known, and never truly alone. Break time equals 3 south, greater than sleep now, beloved one. Sleep in the silence that even the fire could not burn away. Good night. Welcome. You've entered a quiet space where history whispers and time slows. where the flicker of oil lamps casts long shadows and footsteps echo softly on temple stone. Tonight, we meet a woman who is rarely spoken of, but who watched, waited, and witnessed. Her name was Anna, an elderly prophetess, tucked into the corners of the temple in Jerusalem. A woman whose presence shaped no empires, but whose gaze fell on something the world had long awaited. She saw the Messiah not as a king, not as a conqueror, but as an infant wrapped in linen, held in his mother's arms. Stillness surrounded by stillness. In this episode, we will walk slowly through Anna's world. We'll begin with the daily life of a woman devoted to prayer. Then we'll follow the path of her long years, her loss, her waiting, her revelation. We'll explore the mysteries of the Second Temple, the sacred roles of women, and the quiet power of prophecy. And finally, we'll lift our gaze to the contrast between worldly glory and the soft glow of sacred devotion. Let your breath soften, let the world fade, and allow yourself to rest in sacred silence. As we begin with life in the temple courts, daily life in the temple courts, imagine yourself in Jerusalem. The sun has just begun to rise, casting pale gold across the rooftops of the ancient city. The streets are still, but the temple begins to stir. Soft prayers drift like incense on the breeze. Stone steps echo with the quiet shuffle of sandals. Vendors in the outer courts begin arranging baskets of doves, flour, and oil for sacrifice. A new day is beginning in the house of the Lord. You are walking toward the temple, not as a priest, not as a pilgrim, but as one who lives in its shadow. A watcher, a witness. This is Anna's world. She is old now, her back curved by time, her hands folded in reverence. But every morning, she is among the first to arrive. Wrapped in a simple robe, perhaps gray with age, tied with a plain sash. Her face, lined with years, holds the kind of calm that only comes from decades of waiting. Anna lived in the courts, not in the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest entered once a year, not even in the inner courts, reserved for men and sacrifice, but along the edge near the court of women, the place where lamps were lit and stories lingered. She lived a rhythm of silence, prayer at dawn, worship through the afternoon, fasting when others feasted, sitting when others passed by. The temple itself was alive. You could hear its breath in the murmurs of the Levites, the scrape of incense bowls, the rustle of scrolls unrolling, the flutter of birds waiting to be offered. There was always motion, but in the corners. There was stillness, and it was there that Anna dwelled. No one paid much attention to her. She was not rich. She held no title. She did not speak loudly or demand space, but she was present. Every day, like the steady drip of water against stone, she carved out space with her faith. Not by force, but by remaining. She likely swept the floor where she sat, folded her own worn blanket, kept a small flask of oil for her lamp, and day after day, she watched. She saw children grow, wives come and go, priests age and retire. The seasons passed and still Anna remained. For many, the temple was a place of pilgrimage. For Anna, it was home. She was known not by her wealth, but by her waiting. She did not retire from hope. She remained anchored in the sacred rhythm of prayer and presence. The sounds of daily life surrounded her, goats bleating, temple coins clinking, sandals on stone. But within, she held a stillness deeper than sound. A stillness that had room to notice, to listen, to receive. And so, while the world bustled past, Anna watched. She didn't know when the promise would arrive. She only knew how to remain. Biography, her long waiting, and the moment of revelation Anna's life, like so many women of her time, began within the familiar script of expectation. She married young, likely just a girl, when she was given in marriage. 7 years. That was all the time she had with her husband before he died. 7 quiet years of shared meals, shared prayers, shared silence. And then nothing. A sudden stillness. In those days, widowhood was not only a personal grief, it was a social sentence. A woman without a husband was often without protection, without status, without voice. But Anna chose something different. She could have remarried. She could have returned to her family's home. She could have faded into the fabric of the village, like many others. But instead, she went to the temple. Not just to pray, though she did. Not just to worship, though she never stopped. But to dwell, to live. In the very place where the presence of God was believed to rest. Luke tells us she was a prophetess, one of the few women in all of Scripture given that title. Not because she stood in crowds or led armies, but because she listened for decades. She fasted, she prayed, she waited, and one day, after all that waiting, she saw him. A poor couple entered the temple holding a baby. They did not look like royalty. They didn't carry gold or scrolls or signs. But Anna knew this child was different. She may have heard Simeon bless the boy, declaring him a light for the Gentiles and the glory of Israel. Or perhaps she simply felt it, that quiet ripple in the air, the hush of heaven meeting earth. She approached the child, not with entitlement, but with reverence. Her hands, weathered by time, likely trembled. Her voice, worn by years of silence, may have cracked. But in that moment, Anna saw the promise. She had waited not in vain. She had endured not in obscurity. She had stayed long enough to see. Her story is told in only 3 verses, but within those verses is a lifetime of faith. Anna praised God. She spoke to all who looked for redemption in Jerusalem. She became a witness, not to a miracle, but to a child. Not to power, but to promise. She didn't need proof. She didn't need a throne or thunder. For Anna, the face of the Messiah was enough. Mystery, prophetic sight, sacred silence, and hidden light. The mystery of Anna is not in her words, few were recorded, nor in her deeds. She did not part seas or call down fire. Her mystery lies in her stillness, in her waiting, in the quiet discipline of devotion without recognition. Prophecy in her day was often thought of as thunderous, like Elijah's fire or Moses' law. But Anna reminds us that prophecy can also whisper. It can wait. It can simply see what others miss. She was not in the court of kings, nor the scrolls of the prophets, but she was in the temple, and she was watching how many people walked by that child. How many scribes and priests, too busy or too blind, missed the moment? But Anna, through years of prayer, fasting, silence, had tuned her spirit. She did not just know what to look for, she knew how to recognize presence. There's a hidden power in her story. A woman, old, widowed, largely invisible to society, who became the first prophetess to declare the Messiah after his birth. And she didn't do it from a stage or scroll. She did it in passing, in presence. It is easy to miss the significance of this mystery, but think of it. The divine revealed itself not in thunder or spectacle, but in the arms of a poor couple, and witnessed by a woman most had likely forgotten. There is something sacred about this quiet unveiling. It echoes the God who hides treasure in the ordinary, the God who plants kings in mangers and prophets in widows. Anna's vision was not flashy, it was faithful. She had seen sorrow, she had known silence, and yet she remained attuned to hope. In the Jewish tradition, to wait on the Lord is not passive. It is active faith, watching, worshiping, whispering prayers in the dark. That is the mystery Anna embodies. Not the power to predict, but the ability to perceive. She saw the redemption not as a conquering king, but as a newborn child. She knew the sound of God's movement, even when others heard nothing. This is not the kind of story we expect from prophets, and yet it is perhaps the most prophetic of all. For in a world that demands signs and wonders, Anna shows us the miracle of presence, the holiness of holding on, the mystery of a life lived in anticipation of glory. Contrast Anna and the priest, power and presence, the seen and the unseen. The temple was filled with men of importance, Pharisees in flowing robes, scribes with scrolls and ink-stained fingers, priests who knew every word of the law. They held power, political, spiritual, social. They were seen, respected, named. Anna was none of those things. She was a woman, a widow, old, and largely invisible. She didn't hold the scrolls. She wasn't invited to the courts of scholars. She likely wasn't even acknowledged by most who passed her by. But when divinity entered the temple, not in fire or cloud, but as a baby carried by weary parents, it was she who recognized him, not the priests, not the scholars, not the men with titles and tassels. Anna, in her silent watchfulness, had more spiritual sight than those with power. This is the contrast that hums beneath her story. She had no influence, and yet she saw. The priests offered ritual. Anna offered recognition. They recited prophecy. She fulfilled it. In her presence, the veil thinned, if only for a moment. She did not just speak of redemption. She saw it. The powerful were looking for a Messiah of grandeur, one to overthrow Rome, to restore Israel with might. But Anna saw a different kind of Messiah, one wrapped in linen, carried, not commanding, holy, but hidden. It was a reversal of everything expected. The contrast between what is loud and what is true, between those who declare and those who discern. In her waiting, she became a mirror reflecting the contrast of God's ways. The first shall be last. The meek shall inherit the earth. The kingdom is given to children, and those who notice them. Anna was not celebrated in her time, but she became part of a story that outlived every name on the temple scrolls. She reminds us God often chooses the unseen, the ones in the corner, the ones who stayed, the ones who watched and waited.